Hello, and welcome to Danctuary. Hey folks, welcome to the Danctuary podcast, episode 3. This will be a core game episode in which we discuss the latest Diablo 4 quarterly update. It's a beefy one with regards to game systems, and there's a big focus on the skill tree, so our discussions will be revolving around that. And joining us today, we got a panel of wonderful individuals. I've had the pleasure of meeting each of them in person in some capacity or another. We've got our Diablo 3 expert, sVr. We've got our Path of Exile expert, ZiggyD, our Diablo 2 expert, MrLlama, and our Diablo lore and general Blizzard expert, NeinBall, and hat-wearing expert, me. How are we all doing today, folks?
Hey, doing well.
Great.
I'm doing good.
Hey, good. Thanks.
I feel like I need to drop my voice a little for this, you know.
Oh, great. What?
So we're currently in the midst of the D3 PTR. Not everyone's playing that, of course, but some are, some aren't. If you're not playing D3 PTR, what are you guys playing now? Path of Exile? You're playing, looking forward to other games? Baldur's Gate 3 just dropped into early access. I don't know if anyone's excited about that.
So I have not tried Baldur's Gate, but I did play a bit of Heist for I don't know, like 10-15 hours or so. I unfortunately had a lot of crashes, and the dudes weren't opening the doors, so that happened quite frequently. And since then, I know there have been like a bunch of patches, like, you know, GGG always delivers when it comes to quickly iterating on patches and making leaks just significantly better. Kudos to them. It's not everyone that is doing that one. So I haven't touched it yet, but I'll definitely circle back to it once the PTR is done for D3.
Yeah, I've been waiting for the season to get launched on the PTR for Diablo 3. I was going to go and try it out this weekend myself.
I'm playing Diablo 2. But Project Diablo 2 coming out.
Oh,
Right,
So,
yeah.
Yeah,
Most
so excited
ambitious
about
D2 mod, I
excited about
think,
that.
is it?
Feels like it. I mean, it's got the most hype I've seen around a mod in a while, so that's exciting.
so I'm not entirely
What's it
sure
doing
what.
differently?
Yeah, exactly. What is it doing? Like, what is?
So, I mean, it's taking a lot of Path of Diablo, but it's changing a lot of the skills, and just kind of trying to build like a. If Diablo 2, I guess, was kept up to date and adjusted and balanced, and so, you know, he's balancing a lot of skills that were kind of garbage, and making them useful again, changing up kind of how the builds and the trees work some, but still trying to stay true to the core of the game, but then also adding in maps and some later endgame content. And the coolest thing, I think, is he's building some endgame content that's not going to be soloable, really. So it's going to be content that requires you to have a character who is just like a support character, and they don't do
Ooh.
anything else really except just like hardcore supporting to just do a lot of stuff. And so, you know, you're going to try out different combinations for it. So I think that seems interesting.
Isn't that like kind of a hot take in Diablo 2? Like people, I feel like old school Diablo 2 players are against like pure support characters, at least the people that I met.
Yeah, probably. I mean,
I think that's almost kind of like a hot take in ARPGs in general, being forced group play and not having like the solo option.
Sure. I mean, but we're seeing that being discussed for Diablo 4 as well, right? Having those like giant group fights that they're doing, like 20 people, and like you're not going to be able to solo those. So, you know, I like the idea. I always love the idea. I play single player, right? So I love the idea of just playing by myself and dominating everything and crushing it. But I think it's cool to have this unique idea for an online piece of it where there's a few like areas or bosses that are group play. I don't know. I think if you make a lot of the game require it, then you're going to get a lot of upset people. If you just do a couple cool areas, I think that'd be sick.
What's interesting is if you talk to the original D2 devs like Brevik, you know, they talk about they had an idea for a second expansion that would bring in a dedicated support class, the priest. So they were going to want to take things in that direction, and the genre didn't end up going that way. But it's interesting if the D2 core D2 fans would have been opposed to that direction.
Well, it's even just like their version of Diablo 3 started off as an MMO as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. What you been up to, Ziggy?
I've been also heisting it up. It's has been a bit of a battle at times. I've been pretty lucky, fortunately. I didn't have really too many bugs or crashes in the early weeks there. But it has been one of the buggier and crashier leagues that we've had for a while, with a lot of people having the actual like league content, the heists crashing pretty regularly and getting stuck and soft locked in heists and things like that. People to the point where people are avoiding the mechanic or quitting altogether. So it's definitely been a pretty rough one. Like you said, ZiggyD is generally pretty good at responding with patches pretty quickly, and we've had quite a few major ones, and it's almost there now. I think some people are probably still having some issues. It's been pretty much flawless for me since then, apart from the occasional thing like a rogue not opening a door when I tell them to, but generally no like locks or anything like that. Yeah, just a bit uncooperative. So maybe like one more patch that kind of fixes a few of those things, and I think we'll be there. But yeah, it's looking like one of those leagues where it's going to be like a month in, and then it'll be a pretty banger at that point, hopefully. I quite like the core concept of the league and the core gameplay, and I've been super addicted to the heisting.
Just, I've heard so many good things about it, but it's just so buggy. Everybody says they just avoid it.
Yeah. I think it was a bit of luck, I guess. Some people had a perfect experience, and I had barely any problems, but other people just literally could not play it. So it's interesting how there can be so much divergence in that regard. But thanks for having me on the Diablo Talk podcast.
Oh yeah, we're very happy to have you. You bring a unique point of view. I mean, you have experience in Diablo in the past. You're not, you haven't been keeping up with Diablo 3, of course, but we kind of we wanted a panel of people who can bring different views on ARPGs, different perspectives. So we got D3 represented, D2, Path of Exile. We wanted to get a holistic approach so that when we talk about this new ARPG that's coming out, that'll hopefully appeal to all ARPG players, what are the different perspectives? And is it going to be something, is it appealing more to D3 guys, D2, PoE? I mean, but I think you're going to bring a really great perspective to this.
I was pretty excited when you invited me on because I actually am like a massive fan of the genre overall, and I've played pretty much every action RPG and continue to like constantly seek out new ARPGs just to see what they do differently. I find it really interesting to see how the genre can be approached in different ways, and even other genres that I've noticed taking more inspiration from action RPGs. Like I've played some space RPGs that have like action RPG elements and things like that. So I just find that super interesting. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Diablo 4 approaches some of this, and it's fun to discuss the mechanics of it.
Awesome. Well, taking a look at the update as a whole, it's been a couple weeks now that it's been out, and we've had a number of updates in the past. And just without getting granular, big picture, this update relative to the past ones, what were your first reactions to it? I know a lot of people in the past are like, this is just fluff. I'm looking for crunch. I'm looking for game mechanic stuff. So who was happy about this update? Who wasn't? sVr, I'm sure you had some thoughts.
Yeah, overall, I'll say like the first two updates, they were very... I had to look for substance, essentially. They were very thin, that's how they felt. I know that I grind games a lot, and I'm one of those guys who's like, I couldn't care less for lore. I'm sorry, NeinBall, but that's just the way it is. When I see a cinematic for the first... I know. When I see a cinematic for the first time, I think there are two types of people. The people that just, like sit back and they, eat their popcorn and they're watching a cinematic. And there's the other type of people, they're smashing like spacebar or any button on the key. Like, let me go, let me go.
Escape. Get to the fighting.
Go, all right? And I'm the second type. Like, I smash every button to continue smashing monsters. That's what I do. So I'm particularly always interested in like how does the end game look like? What are the final items that we're gonna hunt, right? Like what's the one example of a perfect item they imagine we should find, and specifically like what's the best way to get there? Like do we need to consider pathing on a skill tree, or is that not a thing? Those kind of things interest me the most. So when we were told that, yes, the next blog post will be skill trees, I was very fond of it. I think we've seen a lot of new things in here. The first time I saw it, I was like, yeah, they actually iterated quite a lot. We all remember the skill tweaks or tweaks from BlizzCon. And when I saw the skill tree for the first time, I was like, yeah, that looks like something entirely new and entirely like, next iteration of what we've seen from BlizzCon. After taking a real deep look with CJ into this, we found a couple of similarities that we'll go over later. So after taking a real close look, I'm okay with the changes that we've gotten, but I think we need a bit more, and we'll definitely talk about this one as well. I think MrLlama has a nice mock-up, for instance, and other community members, people on Reddit, other content creators, they also had some great mock-ups and ideas on how to make the next step, hopefully. So I'm happy to have that discussion later.
Awesome.
I'll jump in and say I gave this update like a 9 out of 10. I agree with sVr. It started out, the first two were thin, and I was you'd see some stuff, but there wasn't like, they talk about the lore and we got the cannibals and things, and yeah, all right, cool, whatever. I want to see what the items are like. I want to see what the skills are like. I want to see what the combat will end up like. The core ARPG mechanics are the important thing to me, and so this is the first dive into it that we've really gotten to see. We got to see the skill tree, and obviously there's much to be desired there. I'm sure we'll talk more about that stuff later, but what they wrote within it was still exciting to me. When they talked about items, we're looking at, should magic quality items have higher affix stats than rare items? That's Diablo 2, right? Like, they talked about wanting to do that. They talked about we only want 30 to 40% of the tree to be filled out. They talked about doing these things that I think would bring Diablo 4 back to a really solid ARPG. You guys know I'm not the D3's biggest fan. And you get every skill, you get everything right. Like, I like decisions. I like when characters have meaning and builds, and so you can play through the game again and again, try a new tree, try a new build, try new stuff. And so for me, I just loved seeing all that stuff. The questions they were asking and the things that they were writing about and talking about seemed like they understood the quality mechanics that were missing that they need to bring back. And so I'm very excited.
Quick question to you, Llama. So the one sentence where they stated, a player will only be capable of skilling like 30% or 40% of the tree. It's such a small sentence, but it holds so much like gravity. When I read that one, I was like, heck yeah, finally, like back in the days at BlizzCon, when I heard the sentence, like, at some point you'll have every single skill. And I'm like, so the order, how I get there doesn't matter. It's like,
doesn't matter.
You can play fire, I can play cold. And if we play enough, we end up at the same skill set. That felt incorrect. So I'm very happy that they took that feedback. And now it's, sure, we get to do less. But as you stated, it's more specialization. Like, you actually build a character with a purpose. And that is very, very important in terms of fantasy to me.
Yep, agreed.
I think you guys just hit upon one of the best things about these updates for me is just hearing how they're arriving at decisions, how they're listening to feedback, being receptive, and they just seem to have this very earnest desire to make the game that we want. And they're not afraid to go back on decisions that they were making because the community is reacting in a certain way to them. I think that's a very positive sign for the direction of the game.
Yeah. I mean, I look at the legendary items piece, right? They have that little piece of the blog right at the top there where they talk about it. And that was completely feedback that we gave when we got after the demo, and then I think even kind of the first update, right? And they showed all the like items and the path that it was taking, and everybody's like, this is just doing the same garbage of just like, well, you upgrade to the next item, and a rare is better than a magic, a unique's better than that, then the legendary is the best, and it just has more affix and does more stuff and whatever, and it was just like boring, right? And they took that feedback, and then they came back and they were like, yeah, no, we want these choices to have more impact, and so we want also less power to be, in items exactly, and bring back kind of character power as well. And so they're listening, But at the same time, I don't think, and this is good, I don't think that they're like over listening, right? Because you can definitely have that spot or that time where it's like, is there no direction to this whatsoever? You just, whatever the community or the streamers say. I know a lot of people in the comments I always read, they're like, well, I hope Blizzard doesn't listen too much, because otherwise they're just going to have no clue. They're going to try and accommodate each one of your streamers' feedback, and then it's going to be a giant mess. I don't feel like they're doing that, but I think they're listening to the core pieces, right? Itemization, we don't want every single skill, yada yada, whatever it is, and they're looking at those main things and saying, you know what, we should adjust this, we should roll this back, whatever. So I'm very excited for where it's going.
Yeah, very well said. They're definitely not just knee-jerk reacting to everything we say, but a lot of people in the community, like Mr. Llama, put in a lot of effort into making wonderful videos with feedback, and people have different takes. You can't please everyone, and they're clearly digesting things. I feel that for the first time in perhaps Diablo history, and maybe NeinBall could chime in here, I feel that the community feels heard. It feels like we're being listened to and we're being heard in a way that hasn't happened, I feel, in any previous Diablo game. And so even if they're not doing exactly what we say, it's still clear that they're listening and they're hearing and they're absorbing what's being said. Would you say, NeinBall, that this has happened in the past?
No, not really. Because I mean, like Diablo 1 and Diablo 2, it was just a very different period of time, and there really wasn't that much interaction between like the fans and the developers while the game was being made. In Diablo 3, of course, once we actually knew about it, they kind of already had their course set, and you had the chance, if you went to BlizzCon, you had the chance to play the game. But there was a lot of suggestions and worries and thoughts that the community put forth that unfortunately didn't really get heard until after the game had launched.
Fantastic.
For better or for worse, Blizzard have always kind of done their own thing when it comes to game design, and seem like they avoid, more so than other devs, I feel, looking at the work other people have done and even community suggestions, which is a good idea often, to avoid community suggestions for the most part. You listen to the things that are being complained about, but not usually the solutions that are put forth, because communities are quite good at identifying the problems, but not so good at fixing them.
Yeah. How do you feel about that with Path of Exile? Because from my experience, Path of Exile is like the most listening devs ever, and they're like always there. They're listening, they're changing stuff, they're doing stuff. I mean, I don't know. What's your experience? Because you obviously have way more experience in that area.
It's been an interesting balance for Path of Exile, because, yeah, more so than other devs, they do tend to listen to the community a lot and put a lot of weight on what the community says, especially like the vocal parts of the community, which have been like kind of representative of the core original player base that they attracted with Path of Exile. But they've been able to balance it out reasonably well with the fact that Chris is kind of hard-headed when it comes to, and a few of the people in the kind of core team, a few of the originals are pretty hard-headed when it comes to some of their things that they think are really important for the game, especially things that they consider sacrosanct, so like weight items, itemization, things like that. And have been pretty resistant to some changes. Like, there's been times the community's really, really fought against them. For example, free-for-all looting way back in the day. The game had free-for-all looting. It was considered by the devs to be something really important, and they were pretty resistant to changing that, but eventually kind of the community ground them down. So eventually things like that can change, but for the most part they do try to keep certain aspects of the game untouched as a result. Am I robot mode, am I?
You were a bit, yes, slightly.
We could understand what you were saying if you listen a little harder. Intently listening.
Discord, come on. I'm being silent. Help, I'm being oppressed.
PoE also kind of like approaches things in a different format too, because they don't have PTRs or anything like that. It just kind of launches, and then they take the feedback like after you have the expansion or the league, right?
Yeah, it's resulted in kind of the running meme at this point is that the first week or two of the league launch is the beta. That we're beta testing the game.
We have a PTR in D3, and we still say the same thing in D3. Just saying. I'm sorry.
It's funny that people meme about that though, because the original concept of leagues in Path of Exile was exactly that, to beta test new concepts and game mechanics that could get rolled into the core game. And effectively, it still is in a way. You get something like Heist coming out, and then that 3 month is the trial period for whether this is a core part of Path of Exile in the future. I mean, it's less like that nowadays because pretty much everyone plays the leagues, the seasons.
Leagues are the core game.
Yeah, they are the core game now. So it's a bit less like that, but there's still kind of that core idea that this is where almost anything goes. We can do something crazy, and if it's bad, we can walk it back in 3 months, which I think has been one of the hugest core strengths of Path of Exile.
Great point. So to put a cap on the talk of our past updates here, we got the highlighted section on ancestral demonic angelic powers. This was a system that pretty much right after BlizzCon, the devs rolled out this idea, presented it to us, of 3 new attributes that your character can have and roll as affixes on your gear. Each of these, ancestral power, demonic power, and angelic power, they each do a thing of their own, but there's also some stat requirement system, whereas like in Path of Exile or D2, you need this much strength, for instance, to wear this piece of equipment. It's a variant of that where you have an affix that requires X ancestral power to unlock. So you can wear the equipment regardless, but you don't benefit from the bonus unless you have, throughout the rest of your gear, accumulated enough ancestral power. MrLlama, do you want to talk a little bit more about this system? Because basically they've now come back and said, all right, we heard your feedback and we're going to rethink this because y'all aren't too excited about it.
It honestly didn't seem like they weren't saying we weren't too excited so much as they were saying we play tested and it didn't feel right. And they're talking about carrying around a lot of different items all the time, which makes me curious as to what part of the system requires that. Like when I'm thinking about, obviously I'm going to go to Diablo 2 for this because it's got kind of a similar idea to strength or to, faster cast rate or whatever it is. You're generally not carrying around a bunch of items to like boost your strength up 10 for a really quick time, or you might put on like an FCR ring or something so that you can be a little faster in a certain area, but it's kind of an interesting, I'm not sure what they mean when they say like it required excessive amounts of bookkeeping, because I'm not sure how they were using that system and what the additional piece was. The part I want to really focus on is the second part of it, where they talk about the system of managing stats, because that's really what it is, in my opinion. It's sitting there and basically an item would have, like let's say it has 6 affixes, but 3 of those would be locked behind you need to have X angelic power. And one would be like 20, the other would be like 35, and the last one would be 50. And so if you're playing a build and you like build your character with items that has more angelic power, then you'll unlock those attributes on the item and that item will become stronger. But then obviously like you wouldn't have as much demonic power or whatever, which could be used for some other items attributes. So you put that item on and it's not as good, right? Because you're not running high demonic power. So that's kind of like how it works. And I like the idea. I love the idea of having some stats with meaning and having that idea of like, okay, we want to give you the ability to manage and make that decision of, do I want to put on a ring that gives me more angelic power, or do I just want to ignore that and just say, forget it, it's not worth getting that extra attribute, my ring is better. So I love items and decisions, and when you're sitting there and you're having to think about it, but I don't know, but they say it's a lot of bookkeeping. So I don't know if there's some hidden piece. I really hope that they keep some of that piece of the decision making in there, though. I don't want them to simplify items too much where it just becomes that green arrow, red arrow, standard good bad, right? Like make me make a decision of, I want to have more angelic, I want to be faster in my casting, I want to be whatever, and have those decisions.
So
I read into this a little differently. I might have missed some other context because, like you said, I don't really follow the Diablo community too closely. The way I read into this was that they weren't so much talking about having gear carrying around in the inventory actively for like swapping mid-combat or something, but rather this is referring to the problem that happens in action RPGs quite often, which is the gear puzzle situation, which is when, say, you find an upgrade for one item slot and then you replace it. So you find new gloves, for example, and then it breaks the rest of your gear set. So like in Path of Exile, it'd be the equivalent of either you lose strength, so your other gear becomes unequipable, or you maybe lose resistances, and your new gloves, while better, don't provide the resistances you're missing, so you got to replace 5 other items in order to fix up your gear. That's kind of what I read into this. The problem here is like you have a bunch of items that have like angelic and demonic affixes on them, and then you find an upgrade, but it kind of disables all of the affixes that your build was using. And I can see why that would be a problem.
I mean, isn't that exactly? Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Llama, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, isn't it? That's just like, let's pretend that instead of demonic power, it was cold resistance, and you put on your gloves, and now you're short on cold resistance, and so you go and you change out the rest of your gear to fix your cold resistance. Like, I think that's a core part of an ARPG that needs to be there. Like, you should be, if you take off a certain thing, it shouldn't like not have any effect on you, right? You shouldn't always be able to just upgrade to the better piece of equipment, but rather you should be considering, how does this piece of equipment fit within my overall gear set? And that's what I think PoE does well, Diablo 2 does well, any good ARPG does well, is you wear an item for a specific reason. And when you need to change that all out, if you're really fine tuning it, you're going to change out multiple pieces in your set.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think that's an important part of like adding some kind of weight to your gearing decisions for sure. However, I do think there's an extent of it. It's one of the reasons why GGG is moving away from the gear socketing system, is because that how locked in you get with gear. So it could be an issue of being completely locked in and being unable to upgrade a lot of the time. Especially, it might be less of an issue at endgame, just like it's less of an issue at endgame typically in Path of Exile, unless you're really reliant on a gear slot for resistances or something like that. But more so like sockets when leveling in Path of Exile are could be a good similar example to this situation that they might be encountering here, which is where you're really relying on that 4-socket item that you've got. And if you can't replace that, then it doesn't matter how good the item is, and you can't upgrade for 20, 30, 40 levels because of being reliant on sockets or something like that is really frustrating. So it could be a similar situation where that just goes too far.
Yeah. I mean, one of the takeaways that I had from this one was where it determines like the ratio of effort to rewards, and like a lot of that comes into it. But one of my complaints that with this particular system that they had shown is that the angelic, demonic, and ancestral powers, they only affected like the secondary affixes. It didn't actually affect like any of the legendary properties on any of the items that we had seen. So it was always like the minor upgrades was the things that you were balancing all of these stats for like a little bit of resist or a little bit of crushing blow damage. But the legendary affixes, the things that are the reason that I'm equipping this item for is that legendary affix, it has no meaning to that whatsoever. So I can still equip it, get the majority of the usefulness out of the item, and then it's just that little tiny less important decision makings that I'm making on the item that ties into. And so one of the things I would like them to see is make the legendary affixes require angelic, demonic, or ancestral power, so that way it's actually really making that decision about how I balance those stats more impactful to my character overall.
Yeah, I should say I actually really like the design concept of this system. It's going to be a lot more work for them to make it work correctly than it would be to just make items that didn't have this system. But if they did make it work properly, you could have a situation where it's balanced in such a way that you have 2 very good affixes on an item, and it's not really possible to go for both unless you make significant sacrifices elsewhere. And that's when you start to get really interesting gearing decisions. It's like, I can go for this very powerful legendary affix, or I can go for this alternate legendary affix that has a different power, or I can go for both, but some of my other gear is going to suffer as a result. And that's when you start to get like, ooh, yeah, that's cool.
Like, what if there's some sick sword that just has some requirement, like 140 angelic and 140 demonic, and maybe 140 ancestral? It has all 3 of them, and every one of them is its own unique, awesome legendary power. and you're generally going to run 1. Maybe you could run 2, but you're doing some sacrifices. But then it could create some like really cool, combination with it, like Ziggy said. I think that would be awesome. But you can use it in different ways, and you can build differently for it.
Or even going into like one of the suggestions that you had made, one of the suggestions that you've constantly made through like your own takes on the Diablo 4 updates is like, what if that makes it so that way I have to give up a legendary slot entirely to just equip a magic piece that has like a much higher role of angelic and ancestral in order to complete the whole build, where I'm having to give up these decisions just to make that one uber item work.
That's the perfect example right there. Okay, I have to trash a ring slot. I don't get any cool, affix from the ring whatsoever because it has 60 ancestral and 30 demonic power. And that's some insane amount that you can get from a single slot, but it's a blue item. And so I've completely thrown away a legendary slot to equip this awesome blue item that just has a ton of power in it, so that I can wear this 6 sword and get dual affix from it or something. Completely perfect example that I think is what I would love to see builds turn into.
And maybe that could be the use of blue items, that they're more meant to power up your other ones, because we're trying to figure out what use do we give to blue items. In D2, it's that they can sometimes roll a little bit higher than rares. Why not? Yeah, work on this. I think it's a great idea. Yeah.
Isn't this exactly what we... So there has been a couple of discussions last BlizzCon about the strict order of items, whether a blue one should always be better than a white one, and so on and so on, right? And this is a very, very rough topic, because people have like... A lot of people believe that it must be exactly this way and the other way is wrong. They are very like polarizing with their opinion about this one. Generally speaking, I feel like D2 people are very about... They feel okay if the perfect item that they are looking for endgame, and I think that's also a very common thing in Path of Exile, is finding a base. Like finding a very specific base that you want to craft on or that you want to work with. This is something that entirely does not exist in Diablo 3 whatsoever. Personally, to me, I feel like there's a lot of value in a system like this. Like when it's super endgame and the best item that you can find is a raw diamond, and you need to put in the work to actually make this diamond a true diamond, with, grinding a lot of time, obviously, accumulating resources, and then rolling the dice and hopefully getting it. I think this is true gear progression, and it's something that I want to see, and this is like a huge topic. It's a bit too much for this specific podcast because we're about skill trees, but how do you guys feel about like the strict order of, white, blue, yellow, and do you think in D4 this order should be broken like it's in other ARPGs?
I feel that there should be some form of hierarchy in the items, and that there should be certain points as you go through and play into like in game where maybe like white or blue items are no longer necessary. That you'll reach a point where you eventually grow out of certain ones. But I think that there should, like you were just mentioning, that there should be reasons, or there should be like kind of like fringe cases where, maybe there is like this one specific reason why I need to equip like this one blue item in my gear set, or, I'm going to be using whites or blues as a base for crafting in order to make some more powerful items. One of the other things I think that like Diablo 2 at least, did well as opposed to like Diablo 3 is that they're, rares and such got a lot of use in those games because you couldn't put a unique, in every single slot on your character that was useful for your particular build 100% of the time. And if they went more that route as opposed to like what it exists in D3 now, where, well, if I'm equipping a legendary that doesn't buff my build in some way, shape, or form, then that's just like a wasted slot. You feel bad if I don't have a piece of gear that's increasing my skill damage, in every single slot. And I think that that's a system that they can, break away from. And, maybe you only are going to have, 3 or 4 items that will actually supplement your build, and the rest are you're using for your resists or your stat requirements or other things.
I mean, y'all know how I feel on this. I feel like
D2?
I've put out a lot of it.
Yes.
Diablo 2 doesn't do everything perfect. A lot of people I think it's the perfect game and everything it does is perfect and amazing. It's not true, but it does items pretty darn perfect. There's just the perfect upgrade as you go blues are generally better than whites, yellows are generally better than blues, uniques or sets are, well, sets are kind of whatever, but uniques are generally better than, your rares. Like everything is generally better, but it's not always the case. And the way that they balance and bring them all back, and as you get to rune words, you start bringing in ethereal items having a lot of value, socketed items, white items coming back in value, and you have that raw diamond that you're just looking for those diamonds out there, and they range from rare diadems and pelts and things like that to charms that are just blue, to blue monarchs and blue javelins and blue things of that. Like you have every item has its like best cases that can just be amazing, but the overall theme is still you're upgrading as you find a more rare item, but it's never like that's 100% the case, right? In some cases, especially with certain builds, that blue ring is going to be the best thing. That, that blue ring has 40% magic find. You can't get that anywhere else on a ring. So cool, but it's like super fringe case, right? Those 640s, that jeweler's mark of deflection, that rare diadem, 2 open sockets, big strength, life, skills, FCR, like super rare, but you hunt for these items and they're so rewarding to find in whatever capacity. And I love that so much. So I just feel like they've done so well with that system. I would love for us to go back towards that system. And I think Rhykker made a great point. What if instead of blue having higher rolling affixes, they just have higher rolling angelic, demonic, ancestral powers? And so now, if you're really looking at that as part of your set, you're actually looking at blues and rares and whites and whatever things for whatever purpose, because maybe you want higher power and that's going to unlock more from these other items. And that's worth a lot. So it requires a lot of balance, but I think it's, that's a fantastic idea, right? And a way they could make it different.
I'm all for the idea of having more focused items. So say having like a magic item that has a greater power in a more narrow field of area versus a rare item that has like a wider amount of power but lesser so. I think that would be very interesting for gearing, potentially using that angelic demonic power system. I would be very surprised if Diablo 4 does this though.
Yeah,
because it's very counterintuitive to the non-veteran action RPG player that you might be looking for specific magic items and that they're still going to be important, and that one might be an upgrade. You look at every single new Path of Exile player, because I get to see a lot of new Path of Exile players and their gearing decisions and things like that. You nearly always see people wearing rares that have 5 or 6 garbage affixes on them, as opposed to a magic item that has 60 life and 30 resistance or something like that. That would be far better for them. In a sense, it gives like a mastery bonus to the game, in that this is something you can learn from and progress as a player. But I would be very surprised if we end up seeing this in Diablo 4. It would be a pleasant surprise though. I'd love to.
I think it's one of those things though that really goes towards the later game grinding players, right? Like, the better you get at the game, the more you're really going to focus on all those affixes and understand how they perfectly affect your build and everything. So yeah, as a newbie PoE player, I go, ooh, more affix, cool, rare, and I put it on. And I don't think about I'm getting massive life, I'm getting good res from this, and this is rounding my character out better if I use this magic, rather than having, this rare. But that's fine for a newer player. The rare is still going to do a good job. It'll still help carry them through the game, whatever. It's just for us who are going to put thousands of hours into these games, being able to have those little moments where we drop a blue and pick it up and go, yo, this is sick. That's so rewarding, So it's for the more hardcore gamer, in my opinion.
The easy to learn, difficult to master.
Exactly.
Yeah. The other drawback to this is how they handle do you start looking through piles and piles of blue items in addition to the rare items that you're looking at and things like that?
Yeah, that's
and this
a
is
big
where,
issue.
when you start to consider this problem, this is where you start to maybe consider that there could be other ways of doing that system rather than just having it be blues that can drop better than rares. Maybe it's something that can be done to blues, or they are specific kind of unique scenarios. So rather than being a magic item, maybe there's a type of item that can drop, or from a specific place you can get magic items that can have the opportunity to have this like more focused power. If that makes sense.
I feel like this discussion slowly like leads to like, how can you identify a blue being good, right? Like, I feel like when you enter this realm of discussion, people will usually start to talk about like item filters, right? Will we actually have like a loot filter system? Can we maybe even filter after affixes, and then we have like sound alerts, like for instance, I play with the Bex blooper alerts on my loot filter in Power of Exile because I like that one so much. Is that something? I mean, that would probably fix it, I guess. Ziggy, would you agree if we would have something like this?
A one solution. Last Epoch, for example, drops everything identified, and they just implemented their loot filter system, which allows you to filter by affixes. And so that's one potential.
That holds your hand too much, though. I don't know.
Yeah.
I come from Diablo 2. Once again, where I feel like it's done perfectly. There's amazing blue items, and none of them are identified. And you decide if you want to like take the time. I think item quantity is a huge piece of it. In Exile, you get 5 million items if you clear one little screen. And so you need a loot filter for all of that. Whereas if you go and there's less item quantity and you see something drop, like I know there's never going to be a blue sash that I'm going to pick up and be like, this is amazing, you know? So you just like learn item bases. You go, I want to pick up monarchs. I want to pick up, diadems. I want to pick up archon plates. Like you learn a few bases that we would want to have those things. And then in those specific cases as well, maybe I'm looking for a low level dueling kite shield that's, artisans, an A mod, right? Or something like that. I just feel like you can then hunt kite shields down and stuff, like, so you can go hunting for very specific items. But
I think that's where it kind of goes into like that when it's useful in fringe cases. So that way, there's specific reasons why I'm hunting for a very specific blue, and if it's something that of course, like the answers to these questions are many, many steps down the development road and the development cycle before we can really figure it out. But, if they were to go through and make it specifically, so I'm playing a sorceress, I have these 5 item slots locked in for the legendaries that I want to use, and now I need to get XYZ, powers in these increments. So I know that, I can fit a blue glove into my build, in order to work through all this stuff.
Exactly. As opposed to just always having on, and so whenever a blue that could be worth something drops, you like know instantly, you go pick it up. Like I like the idea of you missing a lot of cool things here and there because, well, you're not investing your time and you don't care about it, But if you want to go hunt for it, then you can like go for just blue gloves and hunt around for those. Stuff like that. So that once again, I'm a D2 fanboy with items, so I'm always going to have a huge item bias there. But
I like the idea that blue items become naturally more rare late game, so that they're only dropping occasionally, and that brings you kind of like cycles it back around where you like picking up blue items, then you start getting rares, you're like swapping over to rares, you're not really caring about the blue items anymore. Then later on, blues start to kind of work their way back into the game by being, only occasional drops that you're picking up because, hey, doesn't happen all the time that a blue ring drops. But I know that has some potential. And the rarity of that kind of like lends to that idea and makes it a bit easier to also avoid that problem of like, here's 20 blues dropping from a boss. Am I really gonna sort through all of those for the off chance there's something decent?
No, I would hate a game if 20 blues drop from a boss and I need to pick all 20 up and identify them and look to see if they're good or not. Like that would be miserable. I am very specific in that, like, I know only certain bases and certain, specific cases I even want to pick this up and give it an identify. Otherwise, I just let it, leave it there to rot. because I just don't care,
Man, I think we can't wait for the next quarterly update, which will be about itemization. This has been a fantastic talk, and I think we're going to have to return to it.
Yes.
When we get that next episode, because we got a lot more to dive in item wise. But let's return to this blog post here. So the skill tree is going to be the big topic. We're going to quickly go to the enchantment system, just because that should be a smaller discussion. Basically, every class in D4 is going to have its unique game mechanic, its unique system. The barbarian has the arsenal system where it could equip 2 sets of weapons. The sorceress gets an enchantment system where she can select 3 of her skills that are equipped as basically passives, as enchant slots. When she does this, she cannot use them as active skills anymore, but they now have some effect as an enchant skill. So what are our thoughts on this enchant system?
It's something that I really, really like. This was actually one of my favorite parts of this particular update, is going through and learning more about this. One is just like the next progression for ARPGs. Like, I liked that Diablo 3 tried to break from just every class uses mana, and all the different classes have like its own resource system, which in the early game kind of tied into how they played the game. Once you got to the late game, it didn't really matter so much what your resource was, except for like a couple of builds here and there. But this is something that's really going to make like the classes play fundamentally different from one another. We haven't gotten to see too much from like the barbarian and the druid, but actually seeing it like more fleshed out on the sorceress was pretty exciting for me, just because you got to see a build from all of the screenshots that they shared in the tree before it, where you kind of have this idea. Well, you've got ball lightning, that costs 60 mana. That's like more than half of your mana pool because you only have 100 mana. So it's kind of like it's not a skill that you can spam, but with like the skill points, you can get it to do the crackling energy, which refunds 25 mana, so about half the cost. So it makes it so that way you can have a little bit more throughput on the skill, even though it's very expensive. And through other skills and passives, you can make it so that way your lightning skills can drop more of that crackling energy to then kind of like fulfill more ball lightnings. And then even going back into what we saw in the demo, there was another lightning skill, Lightning Nova, that just passively casts every time that you spend X amount of mana. So you've got this big expensive spell that normally you wouldn't be able to spam, but because of like your talent choices and such, I'm able to go through, cast it a couple of times, maybe get some lucky procs, get some extra mana back, and then it's also then going through and causing the Lightning Nova to go off, which is more lightning damage, more chances to go through and proc that crackling energy to then cast more ball lightnings and such. And so it's kind of like this really cool positive feedback loop. But as soon as you take that skill and put it into the enchant slot, everything changes. The build itself completely changes, and now you're going on more of a kind of like a gambler's set, because when you equip ball lightning into your enchant slot, instead of getting crackling energy whenever it would normally form, it just casts ball lightning. So now it shows you some of the other skills that you could have taken, like the charge bolts, and you can upgrade that one to have even more charge bolts whenever you cast it. So now you're spamming a much cheaper skill just to get more hits, to get more crits, to get more chances at going through, proccing the crackling energy, which will then turn into ball lightning, which is then doing more lightning damage, which is more chances at going through and spawning more ball lightnings, which then have the chance of spawning more ball lightnings, which has the chance of spawning more ball lightnings. And you're going through and you kind of got like this gambler. It's a high risk. You might get no procs and you don't do any damage, but if you get a couple of lucky procs, it could also fulfill that positive feedback loop. And so you've got like the same skill sets, and just changing whether that's an active or an enchant slot, you're looking at the build in 2 completely different angles.
Follow-up question, since you said it's either an active or passive, do we know for a fact right now that if you enchant a skill, you cannot use it actively anymore? That's guaranteed?
Said that in the update.
I missed that one.
Enchant or not, you can no longer use it as active though if it's an enchant.
Wow. Reading advantage.
If you scroll up one tick, you'll see it says that.
Let's take a look.
one more tick.
one more. Okay. It's somewhere in there, I believe
it's the
you.
other ball lightning.
It's the other ball.
Okay, go down. There it is. Yeah, sorry. They're still hovering over ball lightning there. So.
Yep, there you go.
If you play skill and there you go, yeah. If you go up a tiny bit, there you go. You
can no longer use it on as an active skill.
Instead, gain a secondary bonus power. Yeah. No, I think it's great. I love the idea. Once again, I mean, this was one of my biggest issues with D3, and a little bit with PoE, but that's kind of for the different combat reasons. Was just like, I don't feel like there's enough of a character difference feel as I play through, you know? Like, I really want to play through the game, and that's, once again, with Diablo 2, but I'll switch to a different game, Titan Quest, whatever it is. Like, when I'm playing through the game, Grim Dawn, if I have a different character and I'm running this different build, it feels so different, right? The play style. I feel very, very like it's every class has a lot of unique capacity. The barbarian, he sucks and he's just melee and it's this hard grind, you know, and the sorceress, she's a caster and she's all spell based, and it's just, you know, like they play super different. And that's really what I'm hoping that we see here in the early and then also in the later part of the game, is that, you know, they play different. The barbarian has this arsenal system, the sorceress has this enchant system, and each one of them has this really unique feel of how I'm playing the character and how I can upgrade the character and adjust it. So I'm excited for it. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I'm also a very big advocate of the system. Like, generically speaking, having unique class mechanics to make really each class different in terms of fields, like Llama stated. I think to me that's a big plus. I think the way PoE does it with ascendancies, where you essentially like look at a specialization and then you choose to go down that route, is something that I'm very fond of. I know ascendancy has been like a big topic in the PoE league, as in like the power creep league, if you so will. But personally, I'm a huge fan if there's something that only a specific class can get, that you can only achieve by this specific way. I'm not super fond of the arsenal system for Barb, but I usually don't care too much for Barb. But I really like this specific system, and it's something entirely else, I would say. True, in the long run, it's only a passive that you gain. You sacrifice an active skill for that one. But it's something unique to the class, and I'm pretty certain for the other 3 remaining classes that we'll see, that we'll see some other crazy, hopefully unique class mechanics, and I'm very hyped for these, as in, if it really changes how we build around a class, then I'm a huge fan. And it feels like this can be a big deal for Wizards.
Yeah, this was also my favorite part of the post too. I think it's been pretty effectively proven at this point that in action RPGs, class distinction and identity is very important, because if you look at Path of Exile as a case study, it started where there wasn't really any distinction between the classes, apart from starting point and the passive tree, which is like 10 passives different roughly. So they didn't really change how they played or how they felt, or it changed kind of just the optimization of your character a little bit. Otherwise, there wasn't too much difference. And then eventually it was like, hey, this isn't really that interesting. So we added ascendancies to the game, and they just get more fleshed out and added more mechanical differences between classes, which I think is the really important thing as well.
Sure. Did you play before ascendancies?
Yeah, I started playing.
So how do you feel about ascendancies? Like,
I love ascendancies.
All right.
Fantastic addition to the game. I think widely they're really not many people dislike ascendancies, and it's part of the reason I dislike the Scion class, which in Path of Exile, if you're unfamiliar with the game, is kind of like the jack of all trades classes. It's like a watered down blend of all the other classes, in my opinion. Some people love it, but I dislike it for that exact reason, that it has far less identity than any of the others. I always think, why would I pick like 2 less impactful versions of different classes when I could pick one very impactful and like game changing?
So it feels like a watered down version of something else. That's
exactly. So I was pretty excited when I saw this Enchantress system, more so than anything else in the post, because it does seem like it will be very impactful to the feel of the character. It's extremely flavorful. I mean, that's something Blizzard has always done pretty well with, is strong flavor and gameplay feel changing and things like that systems. So this seems like it'll actually have some pretty solid, like, you really feel like you're playing an enchantress here, like you're creating enchantments that are active on your character and things like that. Actually reminds me a lot of Grim Dawn's constellation system, I think it's called, or something like that, where you get a bunch of different skills that are exclusively procs that you tie to your other skills. So you get these passive points that you get, and you get to activate some sort of like meteor or something like that you tie or bind to another skill, so that when you activate that, it has a chance of calling down a meteor. And that system's like some of the really interesting depth in Grim Dawn, and so I'm pretty interested to see that here. I'm a little bit concerned though that this seems fairly limited from what's seen in the post. I mean, we can only tell what Ball Lightning does, I'm pretty sure. I don't think there's been anything else revealed, has there?
Just the meteor. And that one, yeah, it casts randomly without costing mana.
Okay. Yeah, so we got like a cast on crit Ball Lightning, which is pretty cool, and a randomly casting meteor or something like that.
Yeah, it just like drops meteors down every second or something around you.
Yeah, it's Druid's Armageddon.
Yeah,
that's going to be annoying if it keeps going when you're not in combat.
That's my concern of mine. Is it just going to be that every skill is going to activate passively in some way, or is there going to be some other interesting things that are going to happen with certain other skills? Like, I'm not opposed to what we've seen, but I'm like, is it just going to be every skill is going to have some passive cast?
Overall,
I really like combinations and cast on crits, or this will hopefully like increase AoE of this if it does this, or I would imagine and hope that they'll do more than just every skill activates passively, because that seems like a pretty boring system then.
That's the problem. I think it seems like there's a missing layer here to this enchantment system, where I feel like, so there's like 3 or 4 enchantment slots. I feel like each of those slots should do something different depending on the skill. As far as I can tell, if you put Ball Lightning into slot 1, 2, or 3, or 4, it doesn't do anything different. It just always does what Ball Lightning does.
Yeah, it just has the singular enchant effect.
Right. Yeah. So I feel like there should be a second layer to this, where if you put it in slot 1, it becomes like a cast on crit effect. If you put it in slot 2, it becomes like a passively automatically casting thing. If you put it in slot 3, it becomes a thing that orbits your character. If you put it in slot 4, it becomes a defensive buff. Something like that.
Or something, yeah.
Kind of interesting.
Yeah. That I think would add like a lot to it. It might be going like a little bit too far in terms of the like, sometimes less is more, and that's worked pretty well for Diablo and Blizzard in general. But I feel like it might just be a bit too little with what we've seen currently so far, at least.
Yeah,
I definitely like the enchantment system. I do. I've seen some feedback saying like, "Oh, every class should have this," and I'm like, well, we want class identity though, right? I think we're all in agreement here, which is great, that the class identity, unique class mechanics are a great idea. So it's like, okay, well, if we give this to every class, then we have to come up with another unique thing for...
Why make a sorceress over a barbarian, over a druid, over...
Yeah. It's interesting to note that we haven't yet figured out or found out what the druid's unique mechanic is. We thought, or at least I thought, it was the shape-shifting, but that's apparently not it. They're going to have something in addition to that.
Yeah, well, I think it's like the only things that we've really seen, like the only one that was announced was like the Barbarian with the Arsenal system. And that one, you didn't get a feel for it in the demo. I guess you got a little bit of a feel for it, but what they constantly were going through and saying is that you would actually be able to assign the weapons to the different skills. It wasn't just because I used a skill that requires bludgeoning, I'm switching to the mace. It's I have to go and assign the mace to that bludgeoning skill in order to get it to work in the first place. So that way, like your generators, you can put on the one-handed to like go through and, speedily go and generate rage, where then on the spenders, you can put the slower two-handed weapons to just deal more damage. Or you can even put, a weapon that has like a really cool proc effect on a skill that has a good like proc coefficient, to get the most use out of most use out of that. But then like from the druid, of course, in the demo, you had the shape-shifting. But the only thing that we saw from that really was just if you went into the werebear form, you took 30% less damage while you're a werebear, and then for like the 15 seconds after you shifted out of the form. So it's kind of like, I always want to hit Maul at least like, a couple of times a minute to keep that damage. Yeah. But then there was also some other ones that when you looked at the talent tree, that they had passive effects where, oh, you gain, like increased attack speed while werewolf in for X number of seconds when switching out of werewolf. So just so that way, you get a benefit for staying in one form that you might be able to blend into your next form as you shift out.
I wasn't a super big fan, if we go a quick off topic back to that what NeinBall was just talking about, of the constant shift and the benefit persisting out of shift. Because then to me, it really goes away from building a character uniquely, and it more goes into just the it's like hitting your flask in Path of Exile. You just hit your flask every 4, 5, 6 seconds because you want to get all the benefits and keep all your buffs up. And so on the Druid, I make sure I maul once, I make sure I claw once, I make sure I whatever. So I go bear form, wolf form, I get the IS, I get I when I saw that happening, I was like, I really wish I could kind of persist in a form and have more choice towards what form I want to go to, what skills within that form I want to build towards, all of that piece. And maybe there's some shifting back and forth, but only when I'm in the form do I get those abilities, or just so there's not that the benefits persist. Because like I say, as soon as it does that, it's just instantly Path of Exile flash system is all I think of, and I'm just hitting every form every few seconds, and I'm just having to go through it. Or it reminds me of my Tal Rasha source on Diablo 3, where I had to cast a lightning skill, a cold skill, a fire skill, right? You have to do all of those to keep your damage up. And so you're just on a constant set cycle of everything.
Yeah, you're juggling.
Yeah. And it's just, I don't know. I don't really like that as much. So I hope they do that.
Yeah, it's definitely also a bigger issue in Indie Free for Wizard with for instance Archon. When you pop Archon and you just gather Archon stacks, and then when you drop out of Archon, then you're doing your damage. But you actually don't really use Archon, you just use it as a catalyst to gain stacks, such that out of Archon you hit harder, and that's it. So I feel like it's definitely something that a lot of Wizard players in Diablo 3 dislike by quite a lot, that every single time there's a buff to Archon, it also means that we're playing reverse Archon builds. And that is something that can always, when I look at the Druid class, what we've seen with going into one form, going into the next form, and then going into the normal human form, and now I can do my stuff, let's go, for 5 seconds before I need to rotate again. I agree. I think that's a bad thing. I don't want to see this. We'll see if the unique class system that the Druid gets will circumvent that one, maybe help out with that issue. I don't know, maybe they will be permanent, these buffs. Maybe you can only pick one form and it will be permanent. We'll have to see, but I agree that this is a possible tripping stone for the Druid class.
Yeah.
I kind of like Llama's idea of maybe the Druid system actually is you have 3 separate action bars. That you can go through and customize. It's kind of like what they do with the Druid in World of Warcraft. But each form has its own set of skills and action bars. So as you shapeshift through, you can completely change the playstyle of your character.
Ooh, yeah, that's huge. Yeah. So one thing that we've seen that was unique to the Druid class was Crushing Blow, right? Only Druid had Crushing Blow on his skills, if I recall correctly. Do you guys remember any of the other 2 classes having Crushing Blow? If I recall correctly,
no.
Yeah, built into the skill.
I don't remember that.
All right,
far back.
No, it's fine. So there was one unique thing that I remember about Druid.
That's the class mechanic.
Crushing Blow.
That's it. Crushing Blow. Congrats.
We welcome our Druid overlords.
Yes.
So there was something that they snuck in here that NeinBall covered, but it was really interesting how they just snuck it in for those of us paying attention. They're introducing a new game mechanic via the Overcharge skill and Crackling Energy, where we see the Overcharge skill, critical hit effect, lightning damage has a 3% chance to create Crackling Energy. And what is Crackling Energy? It gives you 25 mana when you move near it. So these things are going to spawn. They're kind of like health globes, but they're mana globes that'll spawn based on a trigger effect. So I don't think we had seen anything like this previously in the game. And this segues us into our talk about the talent trees, because it's something that they did change modify. But as we get into that, I think we have a comparison image here, sVr.
Yeah, that is correct. We have a couple of images to show. So this is the new skill tree, right, that we've seen with this blog post. And for the next couple of minutes, we'll take a bit of a closer look into what actually happened, I suppose. And for the first part, we'll take a look at the passive tree. Oh, sorry. The passive tree, right? So the passive tree was previously named the talent tree. If you guys remember at BlizzCon, we had like 3 UI interfaces. One was like items, where you can equip your stuff. Second one was skills, I believe, right? Where you could just select skills. It was like very D3 style. You just selected them and then that's it. And the last one was the tree, which is the talent tree. I know that a lot of people, like after BlizzCon, there was like this common joke, those are talent twigs, this is not a tree, right? So they changed it to now it being a tree. But if we take a real deep look and we actually compare like the structure of the passive tree on the right and the talent tree the passive tree on the left and the talent tree on the right, we'll see that they have a fairly similar structure. There's
the exact same thing,
right? So if we take a real close look and we just look at the first travel node, which has like 3 talents on it, right? Take a look and then we see, there's 3 choices there, right? In the new version. We take a look at the second one, travel node, and 3 choices. And then we see there's like a split, left-hand side fire, center cold, right-hand side lightning. So let's go to the right-hand side. Also, there's 2 of them. Let's go one step further. Yep, there's 3 of them. Let's go one step further. Oh, nope, that's about it. So we can say that if you compare it closely, it's the same topology. So passives are essentially talent trees rebranded. That's something that you can definitely take away from the similarities that we see here. I think there's like no large discussion about that one, that this is very close. And then we can go a step further, right? We can take a look at what we've seen at BlizzCon, actually, right? So we'll take a look at the second travel node, which has 3 talent choices. It's Inexorable Reach, Precision Magic, and Elemental Attunement. And then on the right-hand side, we'll take a look at Overcharge, which is on the first node of the lightning path, one of the nodes that we can take. And if we now apply this to the tree, we'll say this is how it should look like, right? So if we apply it to the new system, look at the old topology, apply it to the new system, and see if that's actually the case. We can take away from the blog post, though, that Overcharge is placed somewhere else. So if we take actually the screenshot from the blog post and we Photoshop it into the skill tree, you can see that either Overcharge is misplaced or they actually moved Overcharge. One of those 2 ways. So there's like 2 options here, right? Either they actually changed something and they moved it, or the guy who created the graphic just didn't follow instructions. So that's one thing that could have happened. We're not sure. But what we know for a fact is that Overcharge, the effect of Overcharge actually changed, right? This is now a crackling energy effect, and then previously was something else. Right?
Which is vastly more interesting.
Indeed.
Oh, yeah.
That's
what do we think of the
Sherlock
mechanic?
Holmes digging you just did right there, man. That was insane. I didn't link that much together. All I did was I looked at the passive part of the tree and went, "Oh, we need way more roots than this."
Yes.
That's all I saw. I was like, this is way too plain and simple down here. So I guess that mirrors up with when I saw the first talent tree and I went, "Oh, we need way more than this."
Exactly.
So no change there.
Exactly. So it's very much in line with what we've already seen from BlizzCon in total, right? Topology is the same. We didn't get any confirmation if that's actually the case or if this is like a very first draft and there's much more happening at the bottom. Like this is still a pre-alpha development disclaimer version, right? So things are, could change at any point, subject to change. But I think most changes at this point in the passive section are purely visual, at least from what we can tell. Right?
I guess we're not sure because we know it's pre-alpha in development content, not final. That disclaimer is there. What we don't know from the context they give is whether is this just a mock-up or is this a semi-functional system that they're actually like in the progress of making? Because if it is just a mock-up, then I could see like, okay, just whatever, take the talent twig as an example and just build it up that way. Or do they actually have things literally, at least temporarily, exactly be the talent tree. We don't know at this phase, so we kind of have to assume probably until we see more information, I guess.
Now, as you can imagine, me and CJ, we didn't stop there. We continued the research and found a couple of more things, right? So we can do the similar thing to the top half of the tree, right? Which is the active skills, I guess, that you can like level and try to upgrade. So if we take a look at that one, this is what we've seen actually from BlizzCon, right? So this is the wizard skill set, and if we compare both of them, let's quickly do this in Photoshop. Right, so if we compare both of them, on the left-hand side, we have the Diablo 4 tree. On the right-hand side, we have the Diablo 4 skill selection from BlizzCon. And we could, for instance, try to pinpoint each fire skill on the left-hand side and try to just draw a line to the right-hand side. If we do that one, you can see, yeah, we have a perfect matching, right? So every single fire skill on the left-hand side is also represented on the right-hand side. Hence, nothing got lost. There's a good matching. We can do the same thing for cold things, right? So for cold skills, and we'll see, yep. All Gucci, nothing missing, nothing new. Let's continue. And we can go into lightning skills. In lightning skills, I haven't pointed that one out right now, but at the bottom right-hand side, yes, yeah. Exactly. There's one new there. And if we just highlight the things we couldn't match at this point, we can see that from the BlizzCon version, 4 skills are unmatched. We don't have them in the new tree, so they're either gonzo or we can't see them, but they're definitely not in the tree.
Blank spaces, though, right? Don't we have 4 blank spaces on the tree?
Yeah, we do have blank spaces on the tree, but they have not been defined in the blog post, if I recall correctly, right?
Yeah, they said nothing about it.
Yes. So it could be that those IDs could be the case, but at this point, this is what we see as, what's left here. For the 4 ones that we have in the BlizzCon version, but not right now on the tree, can quickly take a look. Those 4 are Incinerate, Ice Blades, Ice Armor, and Nova. So those are the 4 ones that are right now missing on the skill tree. Fair disclaimer though, if you take a look at the blog post, you will see that Incinerate in the skill enchantment selection is actually here. Right? It is in the overview, in the skill selector, but not on the tree. And this is everything about skill trees that we've found out and the community has found out so far with a bit of research and comparing stuff, right, and drawing a couple of things. So overall, I think it's fair to say that passive tree, well, kind of the same thing, and skill tree, yeah, we got 35 upgrade nodes, right, and we've seen 1 upgrade node, I believe, with the in the blog post. So those can be impactful, but overall, it's not a super significant change to me. How do you guys feel about that one after seeing everything?
I think the major takeaway is that this is mostly a transposition of systems that we've already seen. It's taking the things that exist, but presenting them in one holistic view, which I'm going to use the word illusion. I don't mean this in a bad way, but it gives the illusion of greater complexity when you have literally all your things together on one page. Another thing to note is the passives. So previously, the way skills worked was as you would level up a skill, it would naturally unlock, I guess, runes or extra powers. That before it wouldn't just increase in damage; you would reach stepping stones, in my understanding, where you would unlock like either bigger area of effect or other things. My guess is those have become the other nodes on the tree, like the circular nodes on the tree as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that again, it's just taking what has existed, and again, I don't know if this is just for mock-up purposes or for actual implementation, but taking what has existed and changing how we level it up and giving us more agency in doing so. Now you have to make the choice, well, do I want to actually get talents? Before I just got them. Now I'm making a choice. Do I want to sacrifice putting active skill slots in, or do I want to go for a talent? And then similarly, it used to be, well, I just level up my skill and I get whatever. Now I have to pick, do I want this extra little passive node? Yeah.
Yep.
So since you said this is just essentially like a transposition for the illusion of having more complexity, isn't this something that Torchlight did, Torchlight 3, where they like merged
Indeed,
like different UI systems? Like how was that perceived by the community?
So when Torchlight 3 went into early access, and it's releasing now next week, there was a very visceral immediate reaction by people that it wasn't deep enough. It was very shallow, and people felt like there wasn't a lot of ways to customize your character. And the devs were a little bit confused by that because they felt they had to justify, well, look, there's this skill tree here, and then on this other page, there's this other system where you have a different skill tree, and on this other thing, there's other choices you can make. And so there's like at least 3 different systems where you can make distinct build choices. But because a player just opens up the game, they make a character, they bring up the skill tree, and they just see the skill tree, and maybe they're not being aware that these other things are also build-defining choices, there's a perception of greater shallowness than there actually was. So they rejiggered things, they put those systems together where now you're, again, choosing, okay, well, instead of getting a skill point in each category at different level benchmarks, you're effectively getting 1 skill point, and you choose, and these trees are all kind of combined, and you have to choose which you want to allocate it in. And that was better received. So it's really interesting how perception, how things are presented, can affect our perceptions and thus our reactions to things.
I mean, it definitely changed my perception because it's, you know, after realizing it, after like digging into it, it is very, very much a similar thing to what we've seen already, and something that I disliked essentially. To when I read the blog post for the first time, I was like, hey, so that strategy definitely worked on me without a question. Guaranteed.
For initial hit.
Yes, initial hits, definitely.
I'll wait till. Do you have my picture?
Yeah, of course. We do have.
I was gonna say I'll talk when you want to bring that piece up because
sure. I mean, we can. We can do that right now, right? So, is there anything else on the previous topic?
They're NeinBall or is it?
The overall, are we talking overall impressions or first impressions to the tree, or where we think it should go right now?
I mean, feel free to juggle both.
I guess as the Path of Exile shield, most people would expect that I should. I'll be like, it needs to be at least 100 times this size of complexity,
right?
But I don't actually think that. One of the benefits of playing a lot of different action RPGs is I get to see games do different things differently and see the advantages of those. And massive is one way of making a meaningful, interesting skill tree, having a ton of options, which is what Path of Exile does. And it's also what like Last Epoch does with its skill system, where every single skill has a massive skill tree for it. So those have gone for the massive approach, and it works pretty well for them. But I mean, Blizzard's always done pretty well with the less is more approach, and it doesn't have to be massive in order to be meaningful, but it does have to be meaningful. And I think there are definitely some limitations with the current design that we've seen. I think like what it comes down to is like, we've got to think about what fundamentally makes a skill tree interesting or meaningful. And that's 3 things, I think. There's allowing for opportunities to feel clever. So like you're being a little cheeky with the mechanics. Those are like really brilliant for people that love action RPGs in particular. Those moments where you're like, oh, I'm breaking something. That's meaningful. So skill trees that allow for that is really important. The other thing is having impact choices that actually impact your gameplay. So when you pick a node, you see something different happening in game. And that's actually one of the advantages of a smaller system is per point, you can get a larger in-game impact. And then I think the third thing is the opportunity to have 2 people play the same skills, but their builds are different and they have different strengths. And that's probably the biggest weakness of what I see of the current tree, is that 2 people with the same skills will have the same build. And I don't think there'll be any real differences unless gear has a big impact in the differences. And it probably will only come down to gear. But I'd also like to see the skill tree achieve that too.
It's kind of like where do you want to? Yeah, it's kind of like where do you want to shift the differences in player power between their different choices and systems in the game? My thoughts are actually very similar to that. That complexity is something that I don't necessarily need, in my talent tree or skill system or whatever like that. I want more impact. I want each of my choices to be meaningful. And like in Path of Exile, how many of your skill points or your passive points are used for plus 10 intellect, plus 10 strength, 10% spell damage. It's a lot of a bunch of insignificant choices that become meaningful over time for the opportunity to make a couple of actually really big impactful choices. Because there are some really cool, things in like the PoE passive system where, you you have to like swap, elemental damages in order to get like a greater bonus and all the other types of stuff. But yeah, I would prefer something that's a bit more simplistic, but each choice that I make has a significant impact in what it is that I do. And that I actually feel my character get more powerful with every single one of those skill points that I put in. Like kind of like in Diablo 2, when you're first leveling your character, say you're playing a sorceress, and you're going through and you're putting those points into charge bolt or like fireball, that each one of, even though like that first point I unlocked the skill, cool, awesome, I have this whole new tool that I can use, and then as I'm leveling, each one of those extra skill points that I put in actually is adding a significant amount of damage to it. You're like going from 10 damage to 15 damage to 20 damage. But once you get to the end game, then it's all about the synergies, and those skill choices don't really feel as impactful because I'm just adding like 10%. I'm going from 210% fire damage to 220% fire damage because I'm putting in a synergy point, not an actual skill point. And so that's something that I think a more simplistic system with fewer choices that are more impactful will hopefully be able to maintain that feeling throughout the entire system, from the beginning to the end.
Yeah. So, I mean, Diablo 2 is a perfect game, but its skill system is not perfect. That's actually somewhere, I think NeinBall hit the nail on the head. That's somewhere that it actually really does suffer, in that it's, while you're building the character through, there's actually a lot of meaning with how you're placing your points, because that extra point into Nova is the difference between putting that monster into hit recovery or not, and that changes everything. The range on your static field, right, for every extra point, that's really significant when you're playing through the game. But as soon as you get kind of past that point and you just have enough points, it becomes very basic, right? You're just, okay, I'm a meteor sorceress and I run meteor and fireball. I'm a blizzard sorceress and I run blizzard and ice blast or glacial spike. And that's it. Like, you just don't have any of that meaning. You don't really do anything cheeky, like Ziggy was saying, where you're like, ooh, I'm going to break this build a little bit and try out this crazy thing. You're not really changing even that much based on your items, because I got this item and so now I'm going to run like less points in blizzard. You never do that. You're always maxing blizzard. You're always maxing the synergies. It's very one-dimensional when you get later with it. So I completely agree. I think there needs to be more complexity and more just idea and adjustment and change brought into it as you're moving forward in the game. And as you get to that end game, especially, where you can really change it up and be cheeky. But at the same time, you don't want to, in my opinion, no offense, Ziggy, go full PoE, where the tree is so massive that like I have tried to get many friends into the game, and half of them quit as soon as they open the tree because they're like, nah, this is just not happening. And they just instantly bounce and they're done with it. They're like, I'm okay. Thanks for the suggestion, man. Like, in
the defense of the PoE tree, that's another place where we have two systems effectively put together. It's attribute points, right? In D2, you do it separately. That's lumped in together. If you take out all the smallest nodes in the PoE tree, it's still big, but it's not as overwhelmingly big, and you're left with a lot of very, much more interesting choices as opposed to just the plus 10 int, plus 10 int, plus 10 int, plus 10 strength.
Right.
Yeah.
And the PoE tree also, there is definitely some illusion of choice in it, and there is some fluff in it, and there is some, as you get later and get more refined, your builds get more linear in how you're gonna pick them with the end game stuff. But it still does have choice, and it still does have a lot of interesting things. And of course, along the way, there's so many ways that you can change it up and be like, I'm gonna run MOM now and do this, and and so you can adjust. So I feel like there still is, it has a good balance, but it is just a lot, and until you really learn the tree, it's very daunting.
Well, yeah, while on the topic of PoE, and I think Ziggy made a great point about the cheeky passives or keystones that you can select. How do you guys feel about those super ridiculous keystones on PoE, where if your character is not prepared, you're straight up bricking your character? There's, for instance, Chaos Inoculation, right? So CI, you only have 1 health, but what is it? You have immunity to chaos damage.
No chaos damage,
right? So chaos damage in the game pierces energy shield, I believe, right? Which means you would be insta one-shot in that case, so it protects you from that one. And there is something else, like only your totems can do damage. I think that one exists.
You get an extra totem.
Yeah. So how do you feel about those choices that you have in PoE? Is that something that you also want to see? Like, not those exact ones, but just conceptually, there is a keystone. You're like, I wonder what this does. You click the button and, well, re-roll, or, make sure you have a way to respec. Come again?
That's what an Orb of Regret is for.
Yeah.
So
that's what they call regret.
Yes.
But they're also very, you do not do any damage. You only have 1 life point. Like, they're very obvious in their wording. So,
I mean,
the question is, do we want build-defining choices?
I mean, if you put it like this,
I guess to kind of go to the heart of that question, I think if you're gonna have a good impactful system, that requires a little bit of thought and progression, and you're not just mindlessly, I'm just going to click all the cold skills, and that you want to have a little bit of thought behind it. There has to be the ability to fail. You have to have the ability to make bad choices,
yes,
and have a non-functional build if you don't know what you're doing and you're blindly just putting those points in.
Yep.
So it's like it definitely should have, I think that it should even go further, with that. If I want to make like an effective sorceress, maybe I want to play Blizzard or Frozen Orb or something like that. That there should be reasons why I'm putting points in other skills besides Frost. That there should be some reason for me to branch out and to look at other sections of the tree.
I mean, that's a perfect point. Failure needs to be a thing. That was something I didn't feel existed in Diablo 3 when I played through.
Totally.
I just disappointed.
Well,
I was like, I could do anything. I could literally do anything. I'm never gonna fail this game.
That's correct.
The way to fail at a build in Diablo 3 is to not get the item drop.
That's correct.
Not have your set.
Yes.
I guess.
Don't have the items. I mean, isn't this
error 34?
Isn't this another
37?
There is one sentence in this blog post right now, I believe, where they state that they are looking into separating like your character power coming from items and the skill tree equally, right? So if we look at D3, right, like if anyone wants to try a Diablo 3 build where you only equip white items, I can tell you, you're a level 70 character, you go to the first zombie, he smacks you. You have no chance, literally, right? There's just like all your power entirely comes from items. Like your skills are just like, you equip a skill, it does some damage based on your gear and that's it. But, that's just it. In PoE, for instance, I mean, like I know Tabula is a thing, right? So that's an item where you have 6 links, but it gives you nothing else, right? Just equip a Tabula and maybe a couple of other white items that give you like appropriate sockets, and you can still clear a tier 1 map, I would say, maybe tier 2 or even higher. Sure, you don't have defenses, you might get one shot and all that stuff, but you could still reasonably progress, right? So there's more to your character than just the primary stats of your gear or legendary effects. And the same thing applies to Diablo 2, right? Like there's some investment on your skill tree. You can have nothing, but you can still reasonably DPS some low-level monsters and can still progress and get some items.
You can beat the game naked. If you
you can beat,
See? You can
well
beat
enough.
the game.
Mm-hmm.
So the separation
You have the expert on the podcast here. I was the world first person to beat Act 1 with a naked Templar. Took me 24 hours of naked Templar.
Was that a man versus stream thing or something like this? Did you lose a bet or was this just for fun?
It's the Gucci Hobo Challenge, I called it. But I wasn't allowed to equip any items until I got a natural unique drop, which when you're punching things naked with no skills is takes a while.
That's pretty brutal because you also aren't even getting skills.
Yeah, no skills in that
What?
case.
Oh my! That first skill gem that drops must feel amazing, man. Wow.
It took 20. When I say 24 hours, it took 24 hours of in-game time to get my first unique.
Wow.
Oh, okay. Then you were able to go from there.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Now you can play the game.
Yeah, the character's still alive. I'll go back to it one day, I promise. But to be a bit more serious on that topic, though, you could totally, in Path of Exile, There's enough power in the skill tree and the skill gems that you could wear white items, which is just the bare minimum to be able to equip skill gems in the first place, but have no stats on them basically. And you could do quite a fair bit of end game.
And that's how it should be.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But you're going to get one shot, and you're going to have trash res, and you're going to be horrible. But like,
technically,
your items should supplement your power. In D3, they are your power.
Exactly.
Like, and that's also one of the other things I think that D3 did a horrible job is that sense of identity. You know, it kind of like it focused a little bit too much on the the action, and a little bit too little on the RPG aspect of it. And that's something that, skill trees, talent trees, and such, that the role-playing aspect, I'm a lore guy, so that's something that is, big for a lot of people and a lot of the fan base, is that you want to have some sort of identity. It's like when we were all playing Diablo 2, we were playing Cold Sorks or Meteor Sorks. We were playing, Summoner Necromancers. We weren't just playing a Necromancer. We had a sense of identity of the skill choices that we had made. And that's something that I hope and dream that the skill tree and talent system in Diablo 4 will bring some of that back. Even if it takes like maybe having a certain level of permanence where, you can't just freely swap skills and stuff like that like you can in Diablo 3, and that there is some sort of cost or investment that you have to do to respec your talent tree, just to get a little bit of that permanency back, so that way you have more identity with the character that you're playing.
Yeah. Well said.
All right, so we actually didn't really take a look at what Mr. Llama created here. I just, I pulled it up, but we never talked about it. So, Mr. Llama,
I guess we can talk about it now.
Yeah. So, what do we see here? This is these are your paint skills, right? Yeah, this looks very paintish to me.
Paint skills, no judgment. So this goes to, I was trying to find a good balance from what they had versus what last epoch, whatever you say it, and Quinn's design which was every single skill gets an entire tree to itself, which I think could also be cool, but then you're getting towards that PoE levels of complexity. You're getting a lot of stuff into it. Once again, could be cool if they want to add that. I think that'd be kind of sweet. But I feel like this is a better balance and maybe an in-between show. So, for instance, you would have 3 trees, 4 trees, whatever the number of trees, right? They've got cold, light, fire here. So maybe, okay, we do 3 trees. And this would be an example of like the cold mastery tree. And so you have your cold masteries. Maybe you have your single target on the left, your AoE up the middle, and your defensive towards the right. And then you can just kind of go through. You've got your skills. You've got the skills that you get later on down within the tree that are better versions or advanced pieces of the tree. And then, of course, you have the little nodes along the way to improve it. So assuming you're only getting 30 to 40% of this tree, you're having to decide maybe 1 defensive style or 1 to 2 defensive styles. Maybe if you really want to go heavy into AoE, you go all of the AoE, or you just want 1 AoE piece, and then you want like a hard single target DPS. So you get to kind of build your character in a various way using this tree right here. And then, of course, you have fire and you have light as well. And so then you're looking at maybe I want to have fire defensive skills, but cold, light, DPS skills or whatever, right? Obviously, there's plenty that I haven't thought of or added into it. But this just kind of is a more in-depth, gives you more options and more decision-making, I feel like, up here, which I think is somewhat necessary here. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, just more is the idea for the passive tree, and then having those connections be moving across as well, so cross branch. So that way it's not so linear with you just have the 3 lines and you kind of go down each, 1 line at a time, but rather, okay, you can go down here and then cross over and whatnot. So I really steal from Path of Exile in this part, where it's like, have kind of that sprawling root system down below. And I'd actually be really down for them to have an even larger root system that has even more of the passive stuff and gets kind of stronger as you go down certain parts of it, or just has kind of options like they do in PoE there. And, you know, maybe there's some cool game mode where it randomizes the passives down below and it uncovers as you dig deeper. So you never know how you're building your character exactly until you start digging through. Just a random idea thrown out there.
Sure.
But, you know, just some cool, fun stuff. Like, I think there's a lot you can do with a really cool root system. And, yeah, delve, but with passive tree. Exactly.
Or imagine the roots going down into hell and unlocking a descendancy.
That'd be sweet as
Descendancy.
well. Yeah. So yeah, so that's my tree idea. I don't think it's the perfect tree idea, but I think it's it adds a lot more depth to it while not going insanely overly complex.
So the first time I saw this one, especially this Cult Mastery one, it was like screaming D2 to me, technically. So this is definitely
where'd you get that idea from?
Yeah, right. But nevertheless, I think it's a better system because it has more specialization options for me on my character. Like I can decide to go pure cold if I go and find a lightning monster that is lightning immune monster. I'm like, oh well, what can I do moving on, right? Like I decided to go down this road. I was aware of it, hence I must be okay with it. So I like that we can like kind of like all eggs into one basket type of build that we can create with this. I'm a fan of this. I think this is a good idea. And on your passive section, I like that you added circles to it. Like there's actually a way to create a circle, which means you need to consider pathing, right? Because when you click and everything is like linear, like you said, right? There are no circles and there's only exactly one way how I get to the node. And it's a binary decision. Do I want to get to this node? Yes or no? And if so, then I path there and that's it, right? But if you have circles in there, it's like a bit more complicated root system, then you need to actually consider pathing, right? You need to sit back and it's like, is there a smarter way to path through this, right? And this is one of the things that I really enjoy when actually watching very experienced PoE players, where they open like a skill tree, like a POB from somebody, and they go, yeah, you can save 3 points like this. Click, click, click. It's like, oh, yeah, you can save 3 points like this, right? So there's a lot of experience in there, and I enjoy seeing that one, like level of mastery. So hence, I like a more complicated, like structured root system.
For sure. Yeah. That's probably one of my favorite takes, from this version as well, is just, having that nonlinear progression when you're going through the passive, so that way you do have I prefer going this route. I like grabbing this selection of talents to get like this cold ultimate down at the bottom, where other people, they go a different way. I want to say that the one thing that I do like about like the original tree versus this system, and I think this is kind of against what a lot of people in the community are saying, is I actually like the original concept of like the blended tree, where all of the different ones are kind of like meshed together, because that gives you like there's more opportunity for just doing things differently. Like the individual, like the cold, fire, lightning, talent trees have been done since for 20 years now, since Diablo 2. They do work. They work, but you could do more. There's more that can be done. And if you have like a singular skill tree, that they're blended together, you can make for more interesting decisions. Because what happens if like a cold branch and a lightning branch merge into one another? Like just like even thinking like conceptually about the different types of things that you can do with like skilled interactions, like say chain lightning and blizzard merge down a path, and so now you have like this talent that can upgrade it, so when you cast blizzard, it can randomly also like shock enemies for lightning damage, or when you cast like chain lightning, it can randomly proc a blizzard. It's things like that kind of like have like
all right, sorry, you get finished and then I'll ask.
Yeah, it's more, it's like if you have like different like kind of more of a system that allows you to blend your skill choices together, to just make for something that I guess really hasn't been done before.
I guess my thought there is, won't you still get the same sort of idea though, where it's like if Blizzard is next to Chain Lightning, then that just becomes the like build, right? Like you're not going to be able to put Blizzard and Nova together because Nova's on the opposite side of the tree. whereas Blizzard and Chain Lightning are next to each other and their branches merge. And so it's to me that is like the illusion of choice a little bit, and you're not going to have a pure cold tree or something exactly, but you'll have your cold lightning piece, always kind of tied right next to each other. Or are you envisioning a different way of it? Maybe.
Well, I mean, like if you look at the tree that they have, it's not just all the cold is clumped together that's next to all the fire, that's next to all the lightning. They're interspersed,
Yeah.
but so you can basically just pick and choose, which ones can combine together, to have different effects or whatnot. Sure, there will be like that illusion of choice of, you can only combine like these particular ones for this effect or whatnot. But I mean, at the end of it, like just having a purely cold tree in and of itself is an illusion of choice, because all of everything that you put in there is just increasing your cold damage. If I'm putting my points into the AoE, that it's just different flavors of AoE that I'm going through and doing. So it's like it's something that I feel as if just having them like blended together to make things that they haven't really done before. Because that's something that they've done through items, in like Diablo 3, where you can have different skills proc off of different skills, or, you can change the damage types and stuff like that, that allowing you to have like that kind of option of choosing it in the skill tree itself, I thought was just like a cool idea.
Would you say that it's a desire to want to make true hybrid builds fully viable, as opposed to just min-maxing your cold damage and maybe you have like a support fire skill or something? Is that
I mean, it kind of goes back into like what I was saying earlier, where I would like a system where you're actually rewarded for branching out from just like your single minded mentality of only wanting to take cold skills because I'm a cold sword, but I have a reason to want to put a point into like this lightning or this fire skill. While I still am going to be a cold sorceress, but I'm gonna add a little bit of variety like this way.
I think you can totally do that with with my design there in that like tree, you have the cold tree, the light tree, and the fire tree. And I don't think we're running it like synergies and you have to max everything to max all your damage and all of that. I more envision it like the Grim Dawn style, where it's like I put 5 points into the skill and that skill is maxed, and then I can do some stuff along the tree nodes to change how the skill functions and maybe add some cool things about it. But then I'm also doing on the lightning tree, on the fire tree, doing things over there. And yeah, maybe there are interactions across, because I do really agree. I like the build diversity, and I like kind of the hybrid take if you want to go that route, like in Grim Dawn, Titan Quest, whatever, where you're running multiple masteries, or and so you're choosing, okay, I'm using these skills from this one, these skills from this one, and then they kind of boost each other in certain ways as well. So I think that still would be something I would totally love to see right here. I don't know if the branches need to fully cross in it, but I can understand what you're saying about having and maybe it's just a bigger tree then, where you're just having different branches all kind of near each other, so you can really do things like add lightning storms to your cold blizzard or something.
There's a really awesome little indie action RPG called Chronicon that does kind of this system where it has separate mastery trees, so you might have like cold and fire and lightning and all that, and then later on there's like skill modifiers that you can get that allow you to add into your builds skills from other trees, usually through like a proc or something like that, or some sort of extra effect. In some cases, it might even be like one of the modifiers from one of the fire skills in the fire skill tree gets added to the cold skill in the cold skill tree through the cold. So you get some like kind of little, I don't know, warp holes, whatever you call them, between the trees, effectively connecting them. So that's kind of like a way of doing that.
That sounds very interesting.
When I looked at trying to fix the revealed skill tree, since I figured we'd probably be doing that here, it's all coming up with our fixes, I tried to retain the core of what they're trying to do whenever I try and look at something like this. So the idea of keeping one skill tree, I was like, okay, if we do stick with one skill tree, how can we make that work? And I think there's probably two pretty good ways that could make this current system work, whilst also getting a lot of what we want out of the new skill tree. One is the idea stolen from Chronicon, where you can, after each skill, the modifier slots are empty, and you select them, and you select between different modifiers. So you can effectively fill those slots out with different modifier choices. That allows you to keep the same kind of like, when you first look at the tree, it looks the same, but it actually has a lot more depth hidden behind the surface. So that's one possible route.
It's like build your own tree, essentially.
Yeah. Like effectively, you get to customize the branches or customize the leaves. you get to add the leaves on and choose which style of leaves you want for each skill. The other route is to restructure the top half of the tree. I really like Llama's bottom half of the root system, even though that's not how roots work, by the way.
My root is broken.
Oh no!
But for the top half, though, in a way that would be tree lore friendly, I like the idea of skills being a limb, so the large section that shoots off of the trunk, and then major modifiers that shift the way the skill functions more dramatically are branches, and then further refinement options come off of those in the form of leaves. That's I think the lore friendly structure that would allow you to have a lot more depth to the current tree. It would look more intimidating though, because there would naturally be a lot more on there with that structure. That's my thoughts.
Well, the great part about the leaf system, like the Chronicon system, is, again, you just have that one circle, so it's not a lot of visual clutter, but then when you get there and you unlock it, you click on it, and then you have 3 options that pop up, so you only see the added visual clutter when you get there or when you actively select it. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, or that can even be like you can even tie that into like the itemization system, where certain modifiers or things like that can be added into the skill tree via drops. I need to go through and farm like this particular like rank rune, or I need to get this bark piece to go through and add on to my branch.
I would say cluster jewels and PoE. It's one of my favorite things. For anyone wondering, it's basically you're able to add more to your skill tree. So instead of putting a skill slot, in essence, you put something in and it adds more twigs or branches. And I think that could be a really cool system to add to this as well. Like maybe at the very end of every branch, you could choose to take, as NeinBall said, some item that drops, you put it in there and it grows the branch further.
I mean, yeah, that is a massive system indeed. I feel like we went from not adding too much complexity to right now to self-growing trees, and now you need to build your leaves and decide which way to go, and so you have choices everywhere, and everything is like a blank sheet essentially. That's big. I agree that cluster jewels are, first of all, crazy strong, and they're like crazy in terms of understanding them. Like the choices that you have with cluster jewels are just surreal in Path of Exile. I still feel like I skipped the initial leak where cluster jewels were introduced. I think that was Delirium. And I came back to the game a bit later, and I was completely like overwhelmed by all the choices that you have, and I had no clue what's good and what's bad, and I still don't. So I'm super and I like complexity in IRPGs a lot. Like I like diving deep, but this one
never got the feel for me.
Yeah, I actually set out on cluster jewels, and I still have kind of. Like, I know a couple, and that's it. I know what I'm looking for if I look for specific builds, but actually creating something by myself there and figuring something good out, so that's very intimidating to me. Even though the idea of, like, growing your tree and, like, having, like, blank nodes and selecting sounds awesome. Like, it's, like, the pure definition of, like, building your character, building your tree. It sounds amazing, but it also sounds like there are like some severe possibilities of over-engineering and over-complexity and tripping stones for newer players. So on that end, I like the more classic setups, the one that the Llama, for instance, presented. I think that's easier and safer for a newer player. Maybe this could be something that's a unique class mechanic.
You have like a talent, so you're like, we could go back, instead of having a talent tree, you have a talent orchard. You have multiple talent trees.
There you go. Yeah, it's just an orchard. You got your multiple trees. I also thought it would be super sick if there was a 3D tree that you went in.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
That was
to like actually work with, but it would look so cool, and you could have all the different like.
Oh my god!
Well, that's something that Wilson does, where you can actually twist around like the talent tree, so you can make different connections. You know, so that way you could go through and look at that where you flip the tree. On one side is cold, on the next one is fire, and there's your connections through the branches.
Right.
Oh, I want a fourth dimensional tree. Those squares that like flip inside out and rotate and shit. I want a skill tree like that. That's the big brain skill tree. I want to be able to like invert and turn my skill tree inside out to find passives that are not only connected through space but also through time.
You need to find the right moment in the game to actually make the connection and jump to build the tree. Sounds amazing. It's like, no, I missed my window.
And so now so when you reach level 59, what you have to do is at 11:53 Eastern Standard Time, this skill tree or this skill slot will appear on your tree, in the fourth branch. So you have a 2-minute window in order to select it.
Yeah, sounds fun to me. I play it.
In defense of the growing the tree idea, if the concern is overwhelming new players, you just make it an endgame thing. Make it like an Annihilus charm in D2. It's only for endgame players. The average players gonna play through the game. They never have to fuss with it. But then some like either super rare drop, some kind of crazy achievement you do, and boom, you've like you then have to sacrifice whatever skill you have at the end of that node, and you pop in that thing and.
We don't have a confirmed difficulty system in Diablo 4 yet, right? True. We don't know if monsters are actually based on monster level, or if there's like some higher system where you select a difficulty, right? And we know
I believe in some of the conversations that I had with some of the developers at BlizzCon that the idea was to have the monsters level with you.
So D3.
And so that way in like the Diablo 4 demo, the ones where they had the different level monsters and the different dungeons was just to give you an idea of difficulties.
I see. Okay. Because
that was very far from finalized.
And I'm gonna put this out there for the D4 devs. Please do not do this.
I personally agree, but I guess it's an entire podcast for itself, right? But I do agree, like monsters leveling with you, and then you also have like those shenanigans, like when you spawn a monster, then its health and damage is snapshotted. So you first like spawn all monsters on low level, and then you start killing them, and they don't scale up anymore because they have been spawned and attacked already. So it leads to so many shenanigans that we like used in D3. Big oof.
Yeah.
And we should specify that the reason that they did it in D3 was to fix a very specific problem that no longer needs to be fixed. The problem was farming the same zones over and over, facing the same monsters because they're at specific levels. By allowing all monsters to be the same level, all of a sudden you give player choice to farm wherever they want to farm. They fixed that with rifts though. So
correct, we have crater rifts, or like a tiered dungeon system, which we also have in D4. So.
Yeah, I really hope that they go back, because one of my favorite things is a game that has just the monsters and areas have levels. And so if you want to play faster through the game at a lower level, you get into harder areas and it's more difficult, but you can use your skill to maybe still work your way through it. And if you want to go and simplify it down and take it slower, you go back to a lower level area and you fight the easier monsters. And it just works so well when that happens. And when everything around you just always scale, it just becomes, I just hate it. It's just such a boring game. And everything, it's always the same, and then they're like, oh, but you can change the difficulty level in your settings. And it's just let it be the difficulty. Let this just be a hard area. And that's just the thing, a hard area with high level monsters. And I just want to go in there and fight it. And I'm sure in Diablo 4 with this giant world that they're going to build in there, there's going to be plenty of difficult areas that they can just have exist. And we don't need to be able to go back to the starter town and fight things there.
There's still a lot of other ways that you can, gauge and tweak difficulty beyond just the level of the mobs. That's something that you can go through and see that, not all level, 99 mobs have to be the same difficulty. So you can still go through and design zones that are, difficult zones or higher level zones and stuff like that while having, everything kind of scale with you, so that way you can at least be presented with some sort of reward of going back and maybe helping your friend farm a low level area, so to speak, while they're leveling.
And that comes from monster design, I think. I mean, I go to D2, for example, here, souls, death lords, dolls, like, each one very unique in its design and horrifying in their own ways. And, it's like some monsters are easier, some monsters are harder, some monsters are better against range, some monsters are better against melee, right? Like, they all have their various degree of difficulty in their own way and what they're good against and what they're bad against. And so it completely changes the areas, even if it's technically an easier area in terms of level. It could be way harder just because of the monster types there.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason I brought up the topic of monster difficulty and scaling was actually a different reason. So Rhykker said,
no,
right?
We
so
took this tangent.
Yes,
where we
I know.
Wanted to go.
Exactly. So Rhykker stated that how about like having like a clean slate skill tree is something for endgame, right? So one way to achieve that would, I guess, be if you play the game for the very first time, you have a predefined skill tree with the choices that you can choose to do, but you can't like fill in your own choices essentially. And if you beat the game at a certain difficulty, then the next time you play the same class, you'll have an open tree. And the farther you progress into endgame, once you beat the game at the highest difficulty, essentially, which, Inferno, MP10, Hell, or whatever you want to name it, right? Then the next time you start a wizard, or any character class for that reason, you have an empty skill tree, where now you can actually really build your skill tree. So the first time you play it, like, the developers essentially, like, give you a hand. They show you what a working skill tree could look like. And the further you progress, the more empty, more of a clean slate your skill tree becomes at some point. That'd be one way to maybe achieve that system. So just, piggybacking on Rykker's statement.
Sorry we took your ideas. I think it's
I do know that. Yeah, there was a lot of people that wanted that one tree for every skill. I like MrLlama's idea. It felt like a happy middle ground. I did an informal poll on my stream. It was maybe, 100 people ended up replying, and most people voted for one tree for every skill. MrLlama's idea was the second winning option, and the one last place was the D4 tree as it is. I was actually kind of surprised at how many people wanted the tree for every single skill. I mean, I love it in Last Epoch, but kind of as Ziggy says, not every game needs to be super, super deep. Like it's about the meaningful choice as opposed to just more necessarily.
It's not even about depth so much as just the idea of like, I feel like one of Blizzard's historically their biggest strengths has been the ability to look at genres and strip them down to their most fun components. And maybe in some ways they've lost their way a bit, but this has been something that they've done really well in the past. I mean, they looked at the roguelike genre and made Diablo 1 from it, and then refined that with Diablo 2. And we ended up with an entire action RPG genre, which is my baby in my life. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. And that was effectively taking, okay, what's really fun about like roguelikes? What's the core thing? How can we like refine that, make it a little bit, fast paced, make it a little bit more actiony? What's the core parts of fun? How can we distill down like getting items and making characters and builds and playing them? And I think I'm pretty excited to see Diablo 4 come out and have some of like complexity but distilled down. So having potentially one skill tree, like that poll that you did, Rhykker, I feel like is a reaction more than anything to just the fact that the currently designed skill tree doesn't allow for any interesting choices.
Yeah.
And certainly having a skill tree for every single skill would, by just sheer shotgun approach, give you plenty of choices, just because there'd be so many options, so many things, right? But if Blizzard can distill down a smaller tree that can all be in one skill tree on one page, that still has complexity through meaningful decisions, especially if we get, this is the thing I'm most excited about. My favorite part of the Path of Exile skill tree is keystones, right? Those are the ones where you pick them and your build changes significantly. You pick agnostic, one of the newer ones, and all of a sudden your like build feels incredibly different because now your mana is a massive fuel for your life force for healing.
What does agnostic do?
You better have a lot of mana. Agnostic in Path of Exile makes it so that whenever you take damage, 20% of your mana per second is drained, and it's used to refill your life. So it's a very powerful healing effect, but it like excessively drains your mana, and it activates even if you take 1 point of damage though. So there's like a hefty drawback there in terms of your mana. So it's like a difficult thing to balance, but it's extremely impactful. Like you notice that as soon as you take it. So if you can have a skill tree in Diablo 4, which has 50 to 100 options instead of 500 to 1,000, but each of those feels closer to a keystone than a 10 intelligence passive, then I would be excited to see that. Because like I said, I played so many different action RPGs. I want them to do something. I want them all to do things differently that are good and well executed. The current one is definitely not well executed, but I think it could be. I think the concept could be, at least.
And I think that was one of the original complaints. So when the talent tree was first revealed, I think a lot of the negative reaction to it was, one, it was small, and two, the nodes themselves didn't feel very impactful. It's like 3% more XYZ, as opposed to if it had been just chock full of those really build-defining nodes, there probably would have been less negative feedback towards them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it was like 3% extra cold damage or 3% increased AoE of attack, and it was like, who cares?
Yeah.
I don't care which way. That goes back towards that Diablo 3 of like, I feel like I can just pick anything and it still works. Like, let me fail is always the biggest thing I think of when I think of these trees, when I think of these talents with whatever. There needs to be wrong ways to build.
Yes.
That will just break my characters and make my characters garbage because I didn't pay any attention.
And you should always be excited to get a skill point. No matter what level or how far it is that you are into the game. It shouldn't be like one of those ones with the original D4, talent tree that they debuted. You could easily see yourself going through like 5 or 6 levels and like, oh, I forgot to put in my, passive talent points. Oh, I do 10% more damage now. Yay. So it's definitely making those individual choices have impact. You want to be excited. You want to be cool. I get more powerful.
Yep.
You hit upon an interesting thing there. I think we all want to make meaningful choices, but are you able to give at every single... We also like leveling up, right? And every level we like to get something. Like imagine a game where you get something super significant, but only once every 10 levels. I feel like you still have to get something every level. Can that be something significant though? I mean, I don't... Off the top of my head, I could imagine designing a game fully where you get some significant decision to make every level, but that might kind of grow out of control. So I suppose that's why in general RPGs tend to give you smaller decisions to make between bigger ones.
I mean, I think the important piece isn't that you get something significant every single level, but that there's like when I think of Path of Exile or D2 or anything like that, I'm building towards something, right? So, there's this node and it's 6 levels away. And so like, I'm gaining some attributes or going through some small nodes and it's giving me some cold percent damage, whatever it is. But eventually I'm getting to agnostic or I'm getting to whatever piece. And so you have those points where you can either rush there fast, you can make the decision to go towards it, but then like break off and go get a different node to like help you a little bit along the way and increase your defenses more, whatever it is. But you're like, always excited for a level because it's getting you one step closer towards that big thing. And then when you hit that, you get a big power increase. And then you work towards immediately that next node that's going to be really big.
Well said. The feeling of meaningful progression in an RPG is so important. And in D3's endgame, 1 Paragon or 5 Paragon or whatever, there's just
5 main stat.
Go to
5 main stat.
Small thing. If the Paragons were like you were building towards unlocking some exciting thing, at least there would be a greater feeling of progression or impact there, as opposed to just tiny upgrade.
5 more stat.
That's what gets you to play an extra hour as well. Is that like 2 more levels and I get big thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm 10% away from this next level, and I finally get that skill. I can do another dungeon.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then there's the next thing. Yeah.
And you 6 hours later, exactly.
Why is the sun up?
Yeah. So close. No, I just need this one more thing. Then I unlock this.
Going back with the angelic demonic corruption or whatever it is system, I do like the affix unlocking aspect of that in the context of this conversation, where if you are, say, getting that, like, imagine if when you were getting those dexterity nodes, there would be a point where, like, hey, this second in 2 levels, this dexterity node that I'm gonna get is actually going to activate this sick affix on this item that I've gotten. Like that's actually pretty exciting, especially because the way this system works, rather than you just not being able to equip gear, you can still equip it and it's sitting there waiting for it to be activated. That potentially makes even the minor things that are less interesting normally more exciting.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea for like the passives and the pathing that you take to get there. Maybe you can take some pathing through, kind of like strength, dex, int a little bit. You can take some pathing through angelic, demonic, and the third one, power. And so now you're making that decision of how you want to get towards different nodes through those sorts of things. Because, yeah, I think that's a really fantastic way to implement it as well and make those small changes actually larger as well. Every skill doesn't always have to increase something, but it might just unlock some sweet affix for you.
Is that something that you guys are generally speaking in favor of? Like let's say you're leveling a character and you have your build planned out, right? So you know where you're gonna path and you have like a general concept of what you're gonna do, and you're also fairly specific about the order. Like first I want to have this node and then I'm gonna travel this way and get this node. And while leveling, you get this one item which you equip and you're like, maybe I should divert from my original plan. Maybe I should take a detour right now on a skill tree. Is that something that you guys want to see, like the entanglement of items that you find and your current way of playing? I agree.
Yeah, items changing your plans in action RPGs is the best when you find a unique or some item that you want to create a new build for or change your build plans or make some modifications for. I live for that.
Yes.
And if it makes you change even your simple path of how you're getting to your final node, that's something at least, right? That's already cool. If it makes you change what final nodes you even want to go towards, that's like even cooler change and stuff. But like at the very least, I don't want to just sit and look at my skill tree and know exactly what I'm going to do before I find any items.
Exactly.
Unless I'm doing some crazy theoretical build of a very end game character where I have all the like perfect items already laid out and and then it's okay. Well, it's
like everything is setting and stash and you're just leveling this twink to equip the gear.
Like, okay, eventually we're going to get down to those perfect existence things that happen and that happens in any game. But for 99% of it, when I'm going through, give me those items that make me change or the path. Yeah,
you need to sit down and think, oh my lordy, do I go for it right now or do I need to wait 5 levels? That's the good stuff.
Yep.
Sick.
So overall, I guess our takeaway from this post, now that we've talked through the tree, we've looked at the evidence.
The evidence. Exhibit A, Exhibit B.
Exhibit A.
Yes.
How are we feeling about? I guess what have we taken about what we would like to see, or what did we like? What do we not like? Where do we want to go? If we want to just do a quick wrap up here, are we agreeing on like three trees or one bigger tree?
Oh, so gun to the chest. Okay.
I vote one tree.
One tree on NeinBall.
I don't think it matters. I think you could do 1 or 3, but you just need to have the capacity to really allow for more within them, And I think from I think the 3 trees or 1 tree, each section of branches is cold, fire, light, and then those dive into deeper stuff within them, right? Like whichever way you do it, I just think allow for more, right? We just need more on the trees. We need more in the passives. and more different paths, different connections. 1 or 3, I don't care.
So I also don't care about the number. I think Ziggy pointed it out very well a couple of minutes ago, where what I don't want to see is like the so-called, what Ziggy said, shotgun approach, where it's like, oh, they want to have more complexity, so here each skill 1 tree, and then you have infinite choices, but when actually selecting your skills and trying to upgrading your skills in those specific skill trees, then it's very simplistic, and it can add some depth to it, but that's just by swarming us with choices. Meaningful choices, like few but meaningful choices, would be the optimal way. However, that is a very complicated thing to do. It's not easy to create this stuff. If it would be easy to create, then we would have like thousands of ARPGs, right? Which all would have had perfect systems. So knowing that we only have a couple that are really outrageously well designed and are incredibly fun to play for thousands of hours shows you that it is inherently hard to do so. So I don't have the solutions, but I know what I want. And yes, I want something that is definitely more than what we've seen right now. We've seen similarities to BlizzCon. Hidden similarities, we found them, we detected them, right? So that's okay, I guess. But overall, whether or not it's 3 trees and 1 is of each element, or if it's 1 for each skill, if that's what I want to do, I just want more meaningful choices that specifically can straight up break your builds. I'm happy if I make a misclick, or if somebody comes in and he tells me, I clicked this node, nothing works now. I'm happy if that's a possibility. Failing should be an option, and I like failing. So,
yep.
I guess it's like I said it many times, but I feel as if the best system is going to be where your individual choices matter, as opposed to having to make 10 decisions before your choice matters. And then also anything that will help, further build kind of like the class fantasy or the identity of your character. Again, great, cool. Would love to go through and see more of that. And maybe not necessarily more complexity, but having variable options. So where like with the passive system, where you can take different routes and that they aren't just lines, something that's a bit less linear when you're going through and, when you're being able to make your choices.
I think it's really cool that like no one here has really been advocating for just bigger and more. How it's very specific, wanting more impact, more meaning. Because I've seen a lot of comments. Well, so the trees have been positively received on the new tree has been positively received on Summon, but I still see a lot of comments of like people like what, this is still a tiny tree. And I'm gonna have a very special request of you, Ziggy. I'm gonna ask you to ham it up real hard and say, you call this a tree, or you call that a tree, this is a tree. Can I ask you to say that?
I understood that reference.
That's not a tree. This is a tree.
Thank you.
That one.
Beautiful. Yeah. So like people are like, oh, this is still a garbage tiny tree. Like look at these other games. But yeah, I think that's the core of it. It's about the impact. So awesome. Do we have any other thoughts to share on this?
None of us are going to design a perfect skill tree,
Yes.
but
Not
I
in
think
a
it's
podcast,
pretty awesome ideas here. I think it speaks to how cool it is. It's really interesting having 5 people here with pretty different backgrounds in action RPGs, because this has been very interesting to discuss and see all the different kind of approaches, and you can kind of see where they've come from, especially with Llama.
Which is not a bad thing, just saying, that's why you're here. Like,
It's really good.
represent, right?
Represent the game. Hey man, D2 skill tree ain't perfect, I know.
So next blog post will be items. Is there anything like specific that you guys really like? What do you guys expect? Like, let's set expectations first here. Next blog post, 3 months away.
It's itemization, right?
Yeah, it's itemization, right?
Oh, that's huge.
Correctly?
That's huge.
That's big.
Yeah. Itemization is such a fundamental part of action RPGs. There's a lot of questions that we even brought up today here that were already milling over in our minds that potentially need to be answered.
I mean, so let's try to tackle the question maybe from a different point. Like, what questions do you want to have answered after you read the next blog post?
What is the power of items?
Sure, yeah.
And what is the complexity and adjustment, and adjustment's a bad word. You know, like Ziggy was talking about, when I find an item, will it make me want to shift my build and you know, the choice of items. So will we get away from green arrow good, red arrow bad that we saw in demo style?
Like the question yeah, Ziggy, go ahead, sorry.
The thing I would most love to see when I read the post, the thing that would get me most excited, is if they showed one of the developers had made a build, and here was their idea of the optimized gear that they were able to put together. That would be a complete picture. We'd be able to see how the items interact and how they interact with the skills. And at least, now I don't expect that it would be the most optimized version of a character's gearing, because it takes players to figure that out more than devs. But it would still give us a pretty good idea of how it all comes together. And that would answer the question as like, are we just going to be wearing all legendaries? Are they all going to be rares, legendary affixes? Is there going to be a mixture? Are they all going to be blue items? What's the balance here? Because it's difficult for them to strive a balance where there's going to be a mixture, and that's an ideal outcome as well, rather than being just full set with thousands of % damage for skills.
We know that if it's thousands of %, I'm going to lose my mind.
Yes.
They wouldn't be able to dance around that. Like, there would be no kind of like, oh, here's what we kind of hope to see, or here's the ideas behind it. This is just like, here's a character that's good and optimized and playing the hardest content that we have currently.
So I think that's the big thing that we've seen from the blog posts is we've been getting little snapshots of the individual systems that will make up the entirety of the game, but we haven't actually seen how they blend together. And even like in the one where we got to see their latest iteration of like the skills and passives, they're going through and saying, oh, well, but we're also changing this other system that we showed you already. So we kind of, as we continue to go along, we're getting these little snapshots, but we have less and less idea of how they all fit together to actually make your complete character.
Yep, that's a great point. Yeah, you see, like some of the feedback that I see is like Rhykker, you really think this skill tree is deep enough to keep interest in the game? And I'm like, it doesn't have to be. It's not the only system in the game. Like every time they present a system, it's easy to look at it just by itself. But we have to bear in mind that there's going to be other systems that'll interact with each other. Examining the depth of one single system is not doing the entire game a service, when depth can be brought in through the interaction of different systems. And because we don't have this full approach, it could give a perception of, here's this one system. Oh, well, this doesn't seem very deep. But if there's multiple systems, that's where the depth can come. So
CJ, I feel I want to circle back a bit. I feel like you didn't answer that question. Like, if you read the next blog post, what question should be answered for you? Pick one.
I love Ziggy's answer. It seemed I
mean, that was an amazing answer.
What would I like to see? Yeah, I mean, they touched upon it when they gave us the immediate feedback with the ancestral, etc. But I think just having a solid I would like to have a solid understanding of the itemization system, at least as they have it currently envisioned. Seeing more, and they've done in the past where they've given us like the sample items, but again, we don't see how it all sort of comes together with the build with the characters. So seeing a completed build, or at least what they have so far, because they have playable versions of the game. So a character that this is our optimized character that can do the most challenging content. We would have that view of the items and the system, the skill systems interacting together. And now they've revealed the skill system, so they could, talk about it a little bit again in the way that they spoke about items a little bit now. I think that'd be a great idea.
All right.
I think like probably the one question that I would want to be answered kind of resonates with that of where the items themselves fit into your overall progression and your character itself, because like the ones that we've seen so far seem more build defining, and it's one of those ones where it's like it begins to be putting a bit more of your play style on the items that you have equipped more so than the skill choices that you've made. And I would like to see things, I guess maybe more like, one of my favorite examples is like, I believe it's a Death's Web from D2. You can play a Poison Necromancer without that item, but if you found that item, then you're probably going to, oh crap, I'm rolling a Poison Necro because that's awesome. Right. But it doesn't stop you from playing the character. But that item completes, like, kind of like, will be like, it's the creme de la creme. It completes the build. And so I'd like to see hopefully more from the itemization system that looks at it supplementing your skill choices than kind of forcing you into particular builds. Yeah,
I see.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I want to see things that supplement, and then just kind of like a large variety of the items. I just want to see, like, what's a regular cool level 10 rare sword look like, that could have like some quality pieces to it or something, right? It doesn't have to be it brings this skill and gives you 3 times meteors and does all this stuff that I would like completely change my build for. I want to see just what are just decent items at that level, what are garbage items look like, what are affixes that I'm going to go, oh no, when I roll them, like plus to light
crushing
radius,
blow,
gold find, like what are the, like, show me all of those things, because I think that's a really important thing as well. I want to be able to fail an item very often too, and so I want to see what a successful and a failed item look like, and enjoy that piece.
Yeah, if they show crafting, I'd love to see like a complete trash result.
Yeah,
it would be hilarious.
Like some
Awesome.
trash crafting things that you can just meme around, and like funny things to show off there.
I mean, that's one thing that I definitely want to have answered in the next blog post, is not only the items that we can get, but what are the ways to get there. To me, that's very important. Am I really looking for a specific white item at some point? Like, could that be answered in the blog post in the next one? If that's such a thing, then I would like to know. Do I need to, does every high-end item need to natively drop as high-end and I can't craft on them anymore? Is that how it will be? We don't know, but I really want to know, like, what are the different ways to actually get such an item? That's what I want to have answered with the next blog post.
When you watch a build guide and they go through their items and stuff like that, and you're like, oh, that's really cool, that's really clever, like that interaction between that item and that skill, or those two items. That's what I'd love to walk away from an itemization post feeling, is like, I saw a gear set and I was like, that was really clever, the way those two things, like, that gets me excited. It gets my brain cogs ticking away. As the cheeky interactions that I'm looking for.
Yep.
All right. Well, this has been phenomenal. You all have given tremendous insight, wonderful thoughts. I think we'll probably wrap it up here. So we're gonna have our next episode on the 17th, Saturday the 17th. It'll happen 3 hours earlier than today, than when today started. And the topic will be a PTR wrap-up for Season 22 of Diablo 3. The lineup will include myself, Bloodshed, the P-Child, Anna Cake, and hosted by Rex. So huge thanks to everybody for coming on today. Again, sVr, NeinBall, MrLlama, Ziggy. Great range of opinions shared here. Phenomenal. Big thanks to all of you. And we're going to encourage all of our viewers to follow everyone on their socials, and follow the Danctuary podcast itself on Twitter, on Twitch, on YouTube. The episode will be going up
tonight.
Tonight. sVr puts in so much work. And so huge thanks to everyone again, and thanks for listening. Until next time.
Good night, guys.
Cheers, mate. Thanks, mate. You're all bloody legends.